The most decorated commander in the United States Special Operations Command was fading fast. Machines screamed. Military doctors panicked. The entire Riverside Military Medical Center was on lockdown. Colonel Jack Holloway, commander of Delta Force, a man who had survived 3 wars and a dozen Black Ops missions, was being defeated by a surgical complication that no one could figure out. The chief of surgery, Dr. Gregory Pierce, was preparing to call the time of death. But then, a hand shot up. The colonel gripped the surgeon's scrub top with terrifying strength. He pulled him close, and he whispered 7 words that would destroy everyone in that room. "Get me the nurse you people fired." The rain battered the windows of Riverside Military Medical Center. It was a sprawling complex of glass and steel in Virginia. The hospital prided itself on treating the nation's heroes. But inside Trauma Bay 4, the atmosphere was anything but heroic. It was toxic. Sarah Jenkins stood with her hands trembling slightly. Not from fear. No, it was from the adrenaline of having just saved a dying soldier's life, and from the crushing realization that it was going to cost her everything. She could feel it, the weight of what she had just done, the choice she had made. In about 30 seconds, those double doors were going to swing open. Dr. Gregory Pierce was going to walk in, and her career was going to end. But the kid on the table was breathing. His chest was rising and falling. The monitors were beeping a steady rhythm. Private Miller was alive, and that was all that mattered. Sarah looked at her colleague, Betty. The older nurse was pale. Her hands were shaking as she cleaned up the broken glass from the shattered drug cabinet. The sophisticated electronic lock was destroyed. The red emergency hammer lay on the floor where Sarah had dropped it. "He's going to fire you," Betty whispered. "Sarah, Pierce is going to destroy you for this." Sarah didn't answer. She just watched Private Miller sleep. So young, barely 19 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him, a life he wouldn't have had if Sarah had followed protocol, if she had waited for Dr. Pierce to finish his lunch. The monitors beeped steadily. Sarah had done her job. She had saved a life. And if that meant losing everything, so be it. 5 minutes earlier, everything had been normal. Well, as normal as things got in a military trauma ward. Sarah had been checking medication levels. Betty had been updating patient charts. The afternoon shift was quiet, calm. Then Private Miller arrived. He was a kid, fresh-faced, scared. He'd been in a training accident. Nothing serious, just some bruising and a possible concussion. They'd sent him for a CT scan with contrast dye. Standard procedure, nothing to worry about, except his body had other plans. The reaction started fast. 1 minute, Private Miller was joking with Betty about his drill sergeant. The next, he was clawing at his throat. His face was turning red, then purple. His airway was closing up. A severe allergic reaction to the contrast dye. Anaphylaxis. Betty screamed, "Sarah, his airway is gone." Sarah ran over. One look told her everything. Miller's lips were swelling. His throat was closing. He couldn't breathe. His oxygen levels were dropping fast. He had maybe 3 minutes before brain damage, maybe 5 before death. "Get the crash cart," Sarah shouted. "We need to intubate. Now." Betty ran to the equipment, but then she stopped. Her face went white. "Sarah, the drugs, the epinephrine, the paralytics, they're in the secure cabinet." Sarah's blood ran cold. The secure cabinet, Dr. Gregory Pierce's newest bureaucratic nightmare. Just a week ago, he'd installed electronic locks on all the emergency drug cabinets. His reason? Cost control, preventing theft. But the real reason? Control, power. Dr. Pierce wanted to be the only one who could authorize critical medications. The rule was clear. No Schedule II drugs or paralytics to be accessed without an attending physician's thumbprint. No exceptions. No emergencies. No excuses. "Page Pierce," Sarah ordered. "Now." Betty grabbed the phone. She paged him once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Of course not. Dr. Gregory Pierce was on the 3rd floor in the executive dining room, having lunch with the hospital board, courting donors for the new cardiac wing, eating steak and drinking wine while a soldier died. Private Miller was seizing now. His whole body was convulsing. His lips were blue. The monitors were screaming. His oxygen saturation was at 70%, then 65. "Sarah, he's not answering." Betty's voice was breaking. "Pierce isn't answering the page." Sarah looked at the boy on the table. 19 years old. He'd survived basic training, survived the accident, and now he was going to die because of a bureaucratic rule. Because Dr. Pierce cared more about his authority than his patients, not on her watch. Sarah, don't. Betty grabbed her arm. Pierce said he'd fire the next person who bypasses the lock. He meant it. Last month he fired Tom just for questioning the policy. Sarah pulled her arm free. He's turning blue, Betty. I'm not watching a kid die because Pierce is eating steak. She walked to the emergency equipment station. On the wall was a red metal box. Inside was a heavy hammer. For emergencies. For when lives hung in the balance. Sarah smashed the glass. She grabbed the hammer. Sarah, please, Betty begged. You'll lose everything. Better than losing him, Sarah said. She swung the hammer. The electronic lock shattered. Glass and metal exploded across the floor. An alarm started blaring. Security would be here in minutes. Dr. Pierce would be right behind them. Sarah didn't care. She grabbed the epinephrine, the intubation kit, the medications she needed. Her hands were steady. 20 years of experience in combat zones and trauma wards. She'd done this hundreds of times. In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in field hospitals where the only light came from generators and the only backup was your training. Betty, prep the tube, standard size 7. Betty hesitated for just a second. Then her training kicked in. She moved. Sarah administered the epinephrine, 1 milligram, straight into Miller's IV line. His body jerked. The medication hit his system. His airway was still closing, still swelling. The epinephrine would buy them time, but not much. She needed to intubate, get a tube down his throat, secure his airway. Hold his head, Sarah ordered. Betty did. Sarah tilted Miller's head back. She could see his vocal cords. They were swollen, angry red, closing fast. She had one shot at this, maybe two. She slid the tube in, smooth, practiced, precise, past the swelling, past the obstruction, into his trachea. She inflated the cuff, connected the oxygen. The monitors changed. Miller's oxygen saturation started climbing. 70%, 75, 80. His color improved. The blue faded. Pink returned to his lips. By the time the monitors beeped a steady rhythm again, Private Miller was breathing. He was alive. Sarah stepped back. Her scrubs were soaked with sweat. Her hands were shaking now. The adrenaline was wearing off. She looked at the shattered lock, the broken glass, the alarm still blaring. She'd saved his life, but she'd destroyed her career. Betty was crying. Sarah, what are we going to tell Pierce? The truth, Sarah said quietly. We tell him the truth. They didn't have to wait long. The double doors burst open, not swung, not opened. Burst. Dr. Gregory Pierce walked in. His white coat was pristine. His tie was perfectly knotted. There were crumbs on his collar, breadcrumbs from the artisan rolls they served in the executive dining room. He was wiping his mouth with a cloth napkin. Behind him were 2 hospital administrators, both in expensive suits, both looking annoyed at having their lunch interrupted. Pierce stopped dead when he saw the shattered drug cabinet, the glass on the floor, the red hammer, the alarm still blaring. His face went from confused to angry in about 2 seconds. What? Pierce said. His voice was dangerously low, controlled, but underneath there was rage. Is the meaning of this? Sarah stood her ground. Her voice was steady, professional, even though her heart was pounding. Miller went into anaphylaxis, severe allergic reaction to the contrast dye. You weren't answering your page, doctor. I had to act. Pierce walked over to the bed. He checked the monitor. He looked at Private Miller. The kid was stable, breathing, oxygen saturation at 98%, heart rate normal, blood pressure good, a perfect save. But Pierce wasn't looking at the patient. He was looking at the shattered lock. It wasn't about Private Miller. It was never about the patients with Dr. Gregory Pierce. It was about his authority, his control, his protocols. He had explicitly told the nursing staff that he was the only one allowed to make critical calls in his unit. He was the doctor, they were nurses, and nurses followed orders. Pierce walked to the broken cabinet. He picked up a piece of the shattered electronic lock. He turned it over in his hands. Then he looked at Sarah. His eyes were cold. You broke protocol, Nurse Jenkins. He said it loud enough for the administrators to hear, making sure there were witnesses. You destroyed hospital property. You administered restricted medication without physician oversight. That is gross negligence. Sarah felt the anger rising. She kept her voice calm. That is saving a life, doctor. Look at the monitor. He's alive because I didn't wait for you to finish your lunch. The room went silent. Betty gasped. The 2 administrators exchanged glances. You didn't talk back to Dr. Gregory Pierce. Not if you wanted to keep your job. Not if you wanted to keep working in military medicine. Dr. Pierce was the golden boy of the hospital board, the man bringing in millions in grants and donations. His research was published in medical journals. His face was on the hospital's promotional materials. He was untouchable. Sarah was just a nurse. Yes, she was brilliant. Yes, she had 20 years of experience in combat zones and trauma wards. Yes, she'd saved more lives than most doctors would in their entire careers. But she was just a nurse. And nurses didn't challenge doctors. Not publicly. Not in front of administrators. Pierce's face turned red. His jaw clenched. For a moment Sarah thought he might actually yell, but he was too controlled for that. Too calculating. He turned to the administrators. This is exactly what I was talking about at our meeting last week. The insubordination in this nursing staff is out of control. It's a liability. If she missed the dosage, we'd have a lawsuit on our hands, a dead soldier, congressional hearings. But I didn't miss, Sarah said through gritted teeth. The patient is stable. He's alive. Pierce ignored her. He kept talking to the administrators. I implemented the secure cabinet system specifically to prevent this kind of cowboy medicine. We have protocols for a reason. Chain of command, proper oversight. This nurse decided she was above all that. The patient was dying, Sarah said. Her voice was louder now. His oxygen saturation was at 60%. You weren't answering your page. What was I supposed to do? Let him die while you finished your filet mignon? One of the administrators cleared his throat. Dr. Pierce, the patient does appear to be stable. Perhaps we should. No, Pierce cut him off. His voice was ice. This isn't about the outcome. This is about following procedure. What if next time she makes a mistake? What if next time the patient dies because she decided to play hero? He turned to Sarah. His eyes were hard, cold. This wasn't about medicine anymore. This was about ego, about power, about a doctor who couldn't stand being challenged by a nurse. You're done, Nurse Jenkins, Pierce said coldly. Pack your locker. I want you off the premises in 20 minutes. Security will escort you out. Betty stepped forward. Her voice was shaking. You can't do that. Sarah is the head nurse on this shift. She saved that boy's life. Not anymore, Pierce sneered. He looked at the administrators. Make sure this goes on her permanent record as a safety violation. I want her nursing license flagged for review by the state board. I want a formal investigation into her conduct. We can't have cowboys running around my hospital endangering patients. Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Flagged license. Formal investigation. Those were career-ending words. Even if she was cleared, the stain would follow her forever. No hospital would hire her. No clinic. No medical facility. Dr. Pierce wasn't just firing her. He was destroying her. She looked at Private Miller. He was sleeping peacefully now. His chest rising and falling. Color in his cheeks, alive, because of her. She looked at Pierce. His ego was filling the room, suffocating everything else. Sarah took a deep breath. She walked over to Private Miller's bedside. She checked his vitals one more time. Oxygen saturation perfect. Heart rate steady. Airway secure. He would be fine. He would wake up tomorrow. Go back to his unit. Live his life. She'd made the right choice. Sarah slowly reached up. She unpinned her ID badge from her scrub top, the badge she'd worn for 3 years at Riverside Military Medical Center. Before that, 5 years at a field hospital in Afghanistan. Before that, 12 years in various trauma wards across the country. 20 years of saving lives. 20 years of doing the right thing. Gone because of one man's ego. She looked at Dr. Gregory Pierce, really looked at him. He was standing there with his arms crossed, his expensive shoes, his designer watch, his perfectly styled hair. He looked like success. He looked like medicine. But inside he was empty. Small. Sarah's voice was quiet when she spoke, but everyone in the room heard her. You're a small man, Gregory. Pierce's eyes widened. No one called him Gregory. It was Dr. Pierce. Always Dr. Pierce. Sarah continued. Her voice was calm, steady. And one day a patient is going to come through those doors that your ego can't save. Someone important, someone powerful. And all your protocols and your electronic locks and your administrative lunches won't matter. You'll need real medicine, real skill, and you won't have it. I just hope I'm not around to see it. She placed her badge on the metal instrument tray. It landed with a clatter. The sound echoed in the silent room. Pierce's face was purple now. "Security, get this woman out of my hospital." Two security guards appeared at the door. They looked uncomfortable. They knew Sarah. Everyone knew Sarah. She was the one who stayed late to help overwhelmed residents, the one who brought coffee to the night shift, the one who actually cared about the patients. "Ma'am," one of them said quietly, "we need to escort you out." Sarah nodded. "I need to get my things." They walked her to the nurse's locker room. She had 15 minutes to pack, not much time for 3 years of memories. She grabbed her framed photo. Her late husband, Marcus, in his army uniform. He died 6 years ago. IED in Kandahar. He would have been proud of what she did today. He always told her to do the right thing, no matter the cost. She grabbed her personal stethoscope, the good one. The Littman Cardiology 4 that Marcus had given her for their 10th anniversary. She grabbed a few personal items, a coffee mug, a sweater. That was it. 3 years reduced to a cardboard box. She walked out through the main entrance, past the reception desk, past the waiting room full of families, past the photographs of smiling doctors and happy patients. All lies. Marketing. The real Riverside Military Medical Center was what she'd just seen. A place where egos mattered more than lives. The rain hit her as soon as she stepped outside. Cold. Heavy. It soaked through her scrubs in seconds. Sarah didn't care. She walked to her car. An old Honda Civic with 160,000 miles. She put the cardboard box in the passenger seat. She sat there for a moment. Engine off. Rain hammering the windshield. She was 45 years old. No job. A flagged nursing license that would make her radioactive to every hospital in the country. A reputation dragged through the mud by one of the most powerful doctors in military medicine. Her savings would last maybe 3 months. Maybe 4, if she was careful. Her career was over. Or so she thought. Sarah started the car. She drove home through the rain, to her tiny one-bedroom apartment, to her empty life. She didn't cry. She was too numb for that. Too tired. But somewhere in the back of her mind, her last words to Dr. Pierce echoed. One day a patient is going to come through those doors that your ego can't save. She had no idea how right she was. 6 months passed. 6 long months of rejection, of humiliation, of watching her life fall apart piece by piece. Sarah Jenkins was living paycheck to paycheck in a tiny studio apartment on the wrong side of Richmond. The place was barely 400 square feet. The water heater didn't work half the time. The neighbors upstairs fought every night, but it was all she could afford. The rent was due in 3 days, $750. Her savings account had exactly $247 in it. She'd done the math a dozen times, hoping the numbers would somehow change. They didn't. She'd applied to 42 nursing positions in 6 months. 42. Hospitals, clinics, urgent care centers, doctors' offices, nursing homes. Even a few schools looking for school nurses. She'd sent her resume everywhere. Applied to everything. The responses were always the same. At first they were interested. Very interested. 20 years of experience in combat trauma and military medicine? That was impressive. That was exactly what they needed. They'd call her in for interviews. Tell her she was perfect for the position. Start talking about salary and benefits. Then they'd run the background check. And there it was. The safety violation. Flagged by Dr. Gregory Pierce himself. Destruction of hospital property. Administration of restricted medications without physician oversight. Gross negligence. Under investigation by the state nursing board. The job offers would evaporate. The enthusiastic hiring managers would become distant. Cold. We've decided to go in a different direction. We found a candidate who's a better fit. We'll keep your resume on file. Pierce's revenge was thorough. Surgical. He'd made sure Sarah Jenkins would never work in medicine again. So she took the only job she could find. The only place that didn't care about background checks or state board investigations or flagged licenses. Happy Paws Veterinary Clinic. It was a rundown animal hospital on the outskirts of Richmond. The building was old, paint peeling, roof leaking. The sign out front was missing 2 letters. Happy Paws had become Hap Paws. Nobody had bothered to fix it. The clinic treated stray dogs and feral cats, animals that nobody else wanted. The ones brought in by rescue organizations or kind-hearted strangers who found them on the street. There was no money here, no prestige, just hard work and long hours and animals who needed help. The owner was a man named Marcus Chen, 67 years old, Vietnam veteran. He'd been a medic in the war. Came home and decided he'd had enough of human medicine. Started treating animals instead. Sarah's interview lasted about 5 minutes. Marcus had looked at her resume with raised eyebrows. "You're overqualified," he'd said. His voice was gruff but not unkind. 20 years saving lives in war zones, combat trauma, field hospitals. Why do you want to clean kennels and hold down scared puppies? Sarah had thought about lying, making up some story about wanting a career change, about loving animals, about seeking a simpler life. But she was too tired for lies. "Because nobody else will hire me," she said honestly. Marcus had studied her face for a long moment. Then he'd grunted. "People are idiots. You're hired. $15 an hour cash. Don't steal from me and we're good." And that was it. No background check, no references, no questions about the gap in her employment or the flagged license. Just $15 an hour, paid in cash at the end of each week. So Sarah Jenkins, decorated combat nurse with 20 years of experience saving soldiers' lives, started scrubbing floors. She emptied litter boxes, cleaned cages, mopped up blood and vomit and every other bodily fluid imaginable. She answered phones, scheduled appointments, held down frightened animals during examinations and procedures. Sometimes, when Marcus was overwhelmed, she'd assist with basic surgeries, spays, neuters, simple procedures. It was nothing like the complex trauma work she used to do, nothing like saving Private Miller's life. But it was something. It was helping living creatures. And on the bad days, that was enough. Most days, though, it wasn't. It was humbling. Soul-crushing, actually. She'd gone from saving lives in combat zones to cleaning up after dogs, from being the head nurse in a major military medical center to making $15 an hour under the table, from respect and purpose to invisible and forgotten. She'd wake up at 5 in the morning, take the bus because her car had finally died and she couldn't afford to fix it. Arrive at the clinic by 6:30, work until 6 or 7 at night, sometimes later if there was an emergency. Take the bus home, eat ramen or whatever was on sale at the dollar store, fall asleep in her clothes, and do it all again the next day. This was her life now. This was what doing the right thing had cost her. Everything. Meanwhile, across town, Riverside Military Medical Center was thriving. At least, that's what the press releases said. That's what the glossy promotional materials showed. Smiling doctors, state-of-the-art facilities, excellence in military medicine. The reality was different, but Dr. Gregory Pierce had always been good at managing reality. In the 6 months since he'd fired Sarah Jenkins, Pierce's career had skyrocketed. He wasn't just the chief of surgery anymore. No, he'd been promoted. Chief Medical Officer of the entire hospital system, the youngest CMO in the hospital's history. His salary had doubled. His office was now on the top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river. His face was everywhere. Magazine covers, morning news shows, medical conferences. He was the new face of military medicine. Young, dynamic, innovative. He gave TED Talks about eliminating inefficiency in emergency medicine. Standing on stage in his perfectly tailored suit, gesturing at PowerPoint slides about protocols and systems and quality control. The audience ate it up. Doctors and administrators from around the country taking notes, nodding along, thinking, yes, this is the future of medicine. His book had just been published. Protocol Over Panic, A Surgeon's Guide to Excellence. It was selling like crazy, already a bestseller, already being adopted as required reading in medical schools. Dr. Gregory Pierce, author. Dr. Gregory Pierce, thought leader. Dr. Gregory Pierce, the man who was revolutionizing emergency medicine. And the best part? The Surgeon General nomination. Whispers in Washington, his name being floated in the right circles. At 43 years old, Gregory Pierce was being considered for Surgeon General of the United States. He was untouchable, but behind the scenes, behind the press releases and the TED Talks and the best-selling book, Riverside Military Medical Center was falling apart. Without Sarah and the other experienced nurses who had quit in protest after her firing, the trauma department was in trouble. Real trouble. The new staff were young, fresh out of nursing school, cheap, eager to please. They didn't question Dr. Pierce's protocols. They didn't push back. They didn't challenge him. They also couldn't handle complex emergencies the way veterans could. The incidents started small, minor mistakes, things that could be explained away. But they were adding up. 3 months ago, a heart attack patient had arrived. Standard MI protocol, should have been routine. But the new nursing staff couldn't access the emergency medications. The electronic lock system that Pierce had installed was having technical issues. The override codes weren't working. The patient waited 47 minutes for the medication he needed. 47 minutes. By the time they finally got the drugs, he'd suffered significant heart damage. Damage that could have been prevented. Pierce blamed the IT department, said it was a technical glitch, not a systemic problem. 2 months ago, a car accident victim came in. Multiple trauma, internal bleeding. The new team misread the vital signs, didn't catch the dropping blood pressure until it was too late. By the time they realized the patient was hemorrhaging internally, he'd lost a kidney. An organ that could have been saved if the team had been more experienced. More alert. Pierce blamed the paramedics, said they hadn't communicated the severity properly. Not his fault. Last month, 3 lawsuits were filed. 3 separate families claiming medical negligence. Preventable complications, mistakes that shouldn't have happened. The hospital's legal team was scrambling. The insurance premiums were going up. Pierce blamed the patients and their families. Said people were too quick to sue these days. Said it was a litigious society. Not a reflection of the quality of care. It was never his fault. Never the protocols. Never the electronic locks. Never the inexperienced staff. Never the toxic culture he'd created where nurses were too afraid to act without explicit permission. And the hospital board? They kept signing the checks, kept promoting him, kept putting his face on the promotional materials. Because Dr. Gregory Pierce brought in money. Grants, donations, prestige, and in modern medicine, that was all that mattered. The patients suffering, the families filing lawsuits, the experienced nurses who'd quit in disgust, those were acceptable losses. Collateral damage in Dr. Pierce's rise to the top. Sarah was mopping the floor of the clinic one rainy evening. It was late, almost 8 o'clock. She should have been home an hour ago, but there'd been an emergency. A dog hit by a car. Marcus had needed help with the surgery, so Sarah had stayed. The dog was stable now, sleeping peacefully in recovery. He'd make it. That was something. Sarah was alone in the clinic. Marcus had gone home. The front desk was dark. The waiting room was empty. Just her and a mop and a bucket of soapy water that smelled like cheap disinfectant. This was her life now. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers were usually bill collectors. But something made her pick up. Hello, Sarah. The voice was familiar. Betty, her old colleague from Riverside, the one who'd stood by her the day she was fired. They'd kept in touch at first, but the calls had become less frequent. Life moved on. People moved on. Betty? Hey, how are you? There was a pause. Then Betty's voice came through, shaking. Breaking. Sarah, I quit. Sarah's heart sank. What? I quit today. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't. What happened? Betty took a shaky breath. Sarah could hear her crying. There was a patient, a woman, 34 years old, mother of 3. She came in with chest pain, classic heart attack symptoms. But Pierce's protocol says we need to get approval before administering certain medications. So I paged him. He didn't answer. I paged him 3 times. He was in a meeting. A donor meeting. Sarah closed her eyes. She knew where this was going. The woman coded. Right there in the ER. We started CPR. But we didn't have the medications we needed. By the time Pierce finally showed up, we'd been doing compressions for 12 minutes. 12 minutes, Sarah. We got her back, but she's got brain damage now. Significant damage. Her kids came to visit today. They're 8, 6, and 3 years old. The 3-year-old kept asking when Mommy was going to wake up. Jesus, Betty. I filed an incident report. Detailed everything. The delayed response. The protocol that prevented us from acting. Everything. Betty's voice turned bitter. Pierce called me into his office this afternoon. Told me I was creating a hostile work environment. Said if I didn't withdraw the report, he'd flag my license. Destroy my career, just like he destroyed yours. Sarah felt the old anger rising, that familiar burning in her chest. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. You tried to warn us. You told Pierce exactly what would happen, that one day someone would come through those doors that his ego couldn't save. You were right. You were right about everything. Betty paused. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet, defeated. He's going to kill someone, Sarah. Not just hurt them. Kill them. And nobody's gonna stop him because he's too powerful, too connected. Sarah didn't know what to say. What could she say? That justice would prevail? That the system would work? She didn't believe that anymore. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. I've got some savings. I'll figure something out." "What about you? Are you doing okay?" Sarah looked around the empty veterinary clinic, at the mop in her hands, at her reflection in the window. 45 years old, working for $15 an hour, barely making rent. "Yeah," Sarah lied. "I'm doing fine." They talked for a few more minutes, made vague promises to get coffee sometime, to stay in touch, both of them knowing they probably wouldn't. After the call ended, Sarah sat in the empty clinic break room, the small space with the flickering fluorescent light and the ancient coffee maker and the smell of dog food. She sat there and she cried. Really cried. For the first time since she'd been fired, she thought about Private Miller, the 19-year-old kid she'd saved. He'd sent her a letter a month after she was fired, a handwritten letter thanking her for saving his life, telling her he'd finished his training, that he was being deployed, that he'd never forget what she did for him. She thought about that woman's 3 children, 8, 6, and 3, visiting their mother in a hospital bed, not understanding why she wouldn't wake up. She thought about all the patients she could be helping, all the lives she could be saving, all the good she could be doing. Instead, she was mopping floors in a veterinary clinic. She wondered if doing the right thing had been worth it, if saving one life was worth destroying her own. She wanted to believe it was. She wanted to believe that integrity mattered, that standing up to bullies like Pierce mattered. But sitting there in that empty break room, with tears streaming down her face, she honestly didn't know. Her phone buzzed, a news notification. She almost didn't look, but her thumb moved automatically. Muscle memory. The headline made her sick. Dr. Gregory Pierce nominated for U.S. Surgeon General position. There was a photo. Pierce in his white coat, smiling that perfect smile, looking like everything a doctor should be. The article gushed about his innovations, his leadership, his vision for the future of American medicine. Sarah threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall. The screen cracked. She didn't care. She put her face in her hands. She wanted to scream, to break something, to make the world understand how wrong this was, how twisted. A man who cared more about protocols than patients. A man who destroyed careers to protect his ego. A man who was directly responsible for people suffering. That man was being rewarded, promoted, celebrated, while she was here, alone, broken, forgotten. The door to the break room opened. Marcus stood there. He was supposed to be gone, home. But he was still here, carrying a whimpering beagle with a broken leg. Another emergency, another animal nobody else would treat. "Sarah?" His voice was gentle. "You okay?" She looked up at him, her eyes red, her face wet with tears. "No, I'm really not." Marcus came in. He sat down slowly, his old knees creaking. He held the beagle carefully. The dog was scared, in pain. But Marcus's hands were gentle, steady. He stroked the dog's head, soothing it. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just sat there, petting the dog. The silence stretched out, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Marcus had learned a long time ago that sometimes silence was better than empty words. Finally, he spoke. "You know what I learned in 40 years of treating animals?" Sarah looked at him. Waiting. "The dogs I help don't care about my medals from NAM. Don't care that I carried wounded soldiers through rice paddies. Don't care about any of that." He smiled slightly, sad but warm. "They just care that I showed up, that I tried, that when they were hurting, I didn't walk away." He looked at Sarah, really looked at her. "That's all anyone can do, kid. Show up, try, help when you can. The rest of it, the awards, the recognition, the career, the money, it's all just noise. What matters is this." He gestured to the beagle in his arms. "Being there when someone needs you, even if nobody's watching, even if nobody thanks you, even if it costs you everything." Sarah nodded slowly. She wiped her eyes. "Does it get easier?" "No," Marcus said honestly. "But you get stronger, or you quit. Those are the only 2 choices." He stood up, carefully. "Come on. This little guy needs surgery. His leg's broken in 3 places. Going to be a long night. You in?" Sarah looked at the beagle, then at Marcus, then at the cracked phone on the floor with its news about Pierce's nomination. She stood up, she washed her face, she tied her hair back. "Yeah," she said. "I'm in." They worked until 2 in the morning, pinning the dog's broken leg. It was delicate work, precise. Sarah's hands were steady, her focus absolute. For a few hours, she wasn't thinking about Pierce or Riverside or her ruined career. She was just doing the work, helping a creature in pain. When it was done, when the beagle was sleeping peacefully in recovery, Marcus looked at her and smiled. "You're good at this. Anyone ever tell you that?" "Once or twice," Sarah said. She went home on the last bus, exhausted, her feet aching, her back sore. But something had shifted, just slightly. The despair wasn't gone, the anger wasn't gone, but underneath it, there was something else. Something harder, more resilient. She'd survived 6 months of this. She could survive more. She didn't know that everything was about to change. At exactly 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, the night sky over Riverside Military Medical Center erupted with sound. Thwop, thwop, thwop. The unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors. Not just one, 3 of them. Descending fast and low over the hospital. These weren't the standard medevac choppers, the bright yellow birds with rescue painted on the side. No, these were different. These were unmarked, matte black, military transport birds. The kind with armed door gunners and reinforced armor. The kind that flew into war zones. They landed on the hospital's rooftop helipad, one after another, their rotors creating a windstorm that rattled windows 6 floors down. Inside the hospital, alarms started blaring. Security protocols activated, code black, the highest level of emergency, reserved for VIPs, national security situations, things that made the hospital administration very, very nervous. Down in the emergency room, Dr. Gregory Pierce was frantically buttoning his white coat. His hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from excitement, from the adrenaline rush of knowing something big was happening. He'd been asleep in the on-call room, but not the regular on-call room, where the residents crashed between emergencies. No, Pierce had claimed the penthouse suite. A luxury space on the top floor with a private bathroom, a real bed, and a mini fridge stocked with imported water. He rarely used it. Usually went home to his expensive condo. But tonight, he'd been avoiding his third ex-wife's lawyers. They'd been trying to serve him with papers all week. The page had come through 2 minutes ago. Code black. VIP incoming. All hands on deck. Pierce had jumped out of bed, splashed water on his face, checked his hair in the mirror, put on his white coat, the expensive one with his name embroidered in blue thread. Gregory Pierce, MD, CMO. This was it. He could feel it. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Some senator's heart attack, some general's stroke, someone important. Someone whose life he could save, someone whose gratitude would translate into political capital. The Surgeon General nomination was almost his. But almost wasn't enough. He needed something to push him over the edge. A dramatic save. A powerful patient singing his praises to the president. This was that moment. He practically ran to the ER, his shoes clicking on the polished floors. He burst through the doors. "Status report," Pierce barked. The staff jumped. They'd been scrambling, prepping trauma rooms, pulling equipment. The young nurses looked terrified. The residents looked overwhelmed. Dr. David Kim stepped forward. He was one of the newer attendings, 32 years old, nervous, always nervous. He was holding a tablet, his hands shaking. "It's high priority, sir. Code black clearance." David's voice was stammering, breaking. "They bypassed Walter Reed Medical Center and came straight here, because we have the new neurosurgical suite, the experimental equipment." "Who's the patient?" Pierce demanded. David swallowed hard. "Colonel Jack Holloway, sir." Pierce stopped dead. His eyes widened. For a moment he forgot to breathe. "The wolf?" His voice came out as a whisper. "The legendary Delta Force commander, that Jack Holloway?" "Yes, sir." He collapsed during a classified Pentagon briefing. "Unresponsive. Vitals are crashing. The military medical team couldn't stabilize him. Is that they're bringing him to us?" Pierce felt his heart racing. Jack Holloway, the wolf, the most decorated special operations commander in U.S. history. The man who'd led missions in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and a dozen other places that didn't officially exist. The man who'd been featured in documentaries, written about in books, whispered about in military circles like a legend. That Jack Holloway was coming here, to his hospital, to die or be saved. And Dr. Gregory Pierce was going to save him. This wasn't just a VIP. This was destiny. Save Colonel Holloway's life, and Pierce's name would be golden. The Surgeon General position would be guaranteed. He'd probably get medals, presidential commendations. His face would be on every news channel in the country. This was everything he'd ever wanted. Pierce smoothed his hair back. He put on what he thought of as his compassionate genius face, the expression he'd practiced in the mirror. Concerned but confident, serious but capable, the face that made patients trust him, that made administrators promote him, that made cameras love him. "Prep Trauma 1, Pierce ordered. His voice was calm now, controlled, the voice of a leader in crisis. "Clear the entire floor. I want our best equipment, our best staff, no mistakes. Do you understand me? No mistakes." The staff scattered, running to follow orders. David was coordinating on his tablet, updating the military liaison. Confirming equipment, Pierce stood in the center of the ER, breathing deeply, centering himself. This was his moment. This was what he'd been training for his entire career. The doors burst open, not swung. Burst. A team of heavily armed military police flooded the hallway. Not regular MPs, these were Tier 1 operators, Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, men who moved like predators. Their weapons were drawn, their eyes were scanning. Securing the perimeter with brutal efficiency. They wore full tactical gear, body armor, night vision goggles pushed up on their helmets, communication equipment. They looked like they just stepped off a battlefield, which, knowing Colonel Holloway's world, they probably had. Behind them came the gurney, surrounded by grim-faced combat medics, men who'd treated wounds in places where the nearest hospital was 1,000 miles away. Men who'd kept soldiers alive through impossible circumstances. They were moving fast, urgently. Their faces were tight with worry. And on the gurney was Colonel Jack Holloway. He was a mountain of a man. Even lying down, even dying, he looked powerful. 6'4", broad shoulders, thick with muscle despite being in his late 50s. His hair was silver gray, military cut. His face was weathered, scarred. The face of a man who'd seen things that would break most people. But right now he looked like he was carved from granite. Gray granite. His skin was ashen. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His jaw was clenched in pain. His hands were clutching the blood-soaked sheets beneath him. His breathing was shallow, ragged, desperate. He was gasping for air, his chest heaving. His eyes were open but unfocused, glassy. The eyes of a man standing at the edge of death and looking into the abyss. The monitors attached to him were screaming, alarms blaring. Heart rate erratic, blood pressure dropping, oxygen saturation falling. Colonel Jack Holloway, the Wolf, the man who'd survived 3 wars and countless missions, the man who seemed invincible, was dying, and Dr. Gregory Pierce was going to save him, or so he thought. Pierce stepped into Trauma 1 like he was walking onto a stage. This was his moment, his spotlight. He was going to save Colonel Jack Holloway, the Wolf, and the whole world would know his name. "What do we have?" Pierce demanded. His voice was loud, commanding, the voice of a leader taking control. One of the military medics stepped forward. The man looked like he'd been through hell. His uniform was dirty, blood-stained. His face was grim. He'd been trying to keep Holloway alive for the past hour, and he was losing. Sudden onset seizure followed by respiratory distress, the medic reported. His voice was clipped, professional, but underneath there was worry. Real worry. "Blood pressure is 70/40. Heart rate is erratic. We suspect a delayed neurotoxin reaction from a classified mission 3 weeks ago, but we can't confirm. His symptoms don't match any known toxin profile." Pierce nodded, like he understood, like he had this under control. "Get him on the cardiac monitors. I want a full toxicology screen, a CT scan, and get a central line in. Now." The staff moved, the young nurses scrambling to follow orders, the residents pulling equipment, the attending physicians preparing medications. It looked organized, it looked professional, it looked like a well-oiled machine. But it wasn't. The chaos was palpable. Underneath the surface, things were falling apart. Because this wasn't the experienced trauma team that Sarah Jenkins had built. This wasn't the group of veteran nurses who'd worked together for years, who knew each other's movements, who could anticipate what was needed before it was asked for. No, this was Pierce's new team. The young hires, the inexperienced graduates, the nurses who were cheaper, easier to control, more interested in following protocols than saving lives. And they were in over their heads. Jessica Martinez was the new head nurse, 26 years old, fresh out of school. She'd graduated top of her class. Perfect grades, perfect evaluations. On paper, she was excellent. In reality, she'd never faced a crisis like this. She was more interested in administration than patient care, more focused on looking good for Dr. Pierce than actually helping patients. She'd gotten the job because she didn't question Pierce's protocols, because she smiled and nodded and did exactly what she was told. Right now, she was fumbling with the IV line. Her hands were shaking. Colonel Holloway's veins were collapsed from shock. His blood pressure was tanking. Finding a vein was like trying to thread a needle in the dark. "I can't get IV access," Jessica said. Her voice was rising, panic creeping in. "His veins are collapsed. I can't find anything." Pierce turned. His face was already red. "What do you mean you can't get access? It's a basic IV line." "Sir, his veins are—" "Step aside," Pierce yelled. He pushed Jessica out of the way. He was going to do it himself, show them how it was done. He was the chief medical officer. He could handle a simple IV line, except he couldn't. Pierce tried to insert the central line. It was a more complex procedure, straight into the subclavian vein. Faster access, more direct. But it required steady hands, confidence, precision. Pierce's hands were shaking, just slightly, but enough. The pressure was getting to him. All those armed military police standing around the room, watching him, judging him. The combat medics who'd seen real medicine under fire. They were watching too. And Pierce could feel their eyes on him. He inserted the needle, too high, too far to the left. He missed the vein entirely. Blood spurted. Bright arterial blood. It splashed onto the white sheets, onto Pierce's expensive white coat, onto the floor. "Damn it," Pierce cursed. He pulled the needle out. Tried again. Missed again. More blood. Holloway's monitors were screaming now. His blood pressure dropping further. His oxygen saturation falling. 75%. 70%. 68%. "Get the ultrasound machine," Pierce shouted. "Now!" A resident ran to get it, stumbling, knocking over a tray of instruments. The crash echoed through the room. Surgical tools scattered across the floor. It was chaos, complete, unprofessional chaos. And Colonel Jack Holloway was watching it all. His eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they were unfocused, clouded with pain, but then they sharpened. Those blue eyes, still terrifyingly sharp, despite the toxin coursing through his system, despite being on the edge of death. He looked around the room, taking it all in. The panicked nurses, the fumbling doctors, the blood on the sheets, the scattered instruments. He saw Pierce yelling at Jessica. Saw him throw a surgical wrapper on the floor in frustration. Saw the sweat on Pierce's forehead, the fear in his eyes masked by anger. This wasn't professional emergency medicine. This wasn't the best trauma team in the military medical system. This was amateur hour. This was incompetence dressed up in white coats and expensive equipment. Holloway had spent 30 years in life-or-death situations. He knew what competence looked like. He knew what real professionals acted like under pressure. And this wasn't it. He was going to die here. Not from the toxin, but from incompetence. Colonel Jack Holloway had spent 30 years in special operations. 30 years of impossible missions in impossible places. He'd led teams through firefights in Afghanistan, through ambushes in Iraq, through black ops in Syria and Yemen and Somalia, and a dozen other countries that didn't officially exist on any mission report. He'd been shot 7 times, stabbed twice, survived 3 helicopter crashes, lived through an IED blast that killed 4 of his men. He'd been captured once, tortured, escaped. Made it back to friendly lines with 2 broken ribs and a shattered ankle. He'd faced death more times than most people faced Monday mornings, and he'd always made it through, always survived. Because he was smart, because he was tough, because he knew how to assess a situation and make the right call. Right now, lying on this gurney, his body shutting down from some unknown neurotoxin, he was making an assessment. And he didn't like what he saw. These people were going to kill him. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but through sheer incompetence, through panic, through a system that valued protocols over people, through leadership that cared more about appearance than ability. He tried to speak, tried to tell them they were doing it wrong, that the IV placement was incorrect, that they were wasting time. But his throat was swollen, burning, like someone had poured acid down it. The words wouldn't come, just a rasp, a whisper. His vision was tunneling, the edges going black, his peripheral vision disappearing. He could only see what was directly in front of him now. The ceiling tiles, the bright surgical lights, Pierce's sweating face. He was dying. He could feel it. His body shutting down. System by system, organ by organ. The toxin was winning, but his mind was still sharp, still working, still remembering. 6 months ago, he'd been at a classified briefing at the Pentagon. Boring administrative stuff. Budget reviews, personnel reports, the kind of paperwork that came with being a senior commander. The kind of thing he hated but had to endure. During a break, he'd been reading through reports, complaints, issues at various military medical facilities. Most of it was routine, minor problems. But one had caught his attention, a complaint filed by multiple veteran nurses at Riverside Military Medical Center. They were protesting the firing of one of their colleagues. A nurse named Sarah Jenkins, head nurse, 20 years of experience, decorated, respected. She'd been fired for saving a patient's life. A private Miller. The kid had been dying, allergic reaction. The attending physician wasn't available. So Nurse Jenkins had broken protocol, smashed an electronic drug lock, saved the soldier's life. And she'd been fired for it, by Dr. Gregory Pierce, the same Dr. Pierce who was now standing over Holloway, the same Dr. Pierce who was failing to insert a simple IV line. The same Dr. Pierce who was more concerned with his authority than his patients. Holloway remembered reading that complaint and feeling sick. He'd wanted to do something, make a call, file a counter-complaint. But he'd been deployed the next day. 3 weeks in classified territory. The complaint had slipped his mind. There were always fires to put out, always crises to manage. Now, lying here, dying, Holloway remembered. And he understood. Dr. Pierce had fired the one nurse who might have been able to save him. The one nurse who had the skill and the courage to act when it mattered. He remembered the name, Sarah Jenkins. Pierce was leaning over him now, his face too close, his breath smelling like expensive scotch and peppermint, the smell of someone who'd been drinking in his office, trying to calm his nerves before this big moment. "Colonel, stay with us," Pierce said. His voice was trying to be reassuring, confident, but Holloway could hear the fear underneath, the doubt. "You're in the best hands in the country. We're going to take care of you." Holloway looked at Pierce, really looked at him. He saw the ego, the arrogance, the desperation to be seen as a hero. And underneath all that, he saw the fear. Pierce knew he was failing, knew he was in over his head, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. Holloway gathered every ounce of strength he had left. His right hand shot up, fast, despite the toxin, despite the failing muscles. He grabbed Pierce's white coat, his fingers locked onto the fabric with terrifying strength. The grip of a man who'd climbed mountains and rappelled from helicopters and done 1,000 pull-ups with full combat gear. He pulled Pierce down. Hard. Pierce's face came within inches of his own. "Get me the nurse," Holloway rasped. Each word cost him. Each syllable felt like swallowing glass. "You people fired." The room went dead silent. The monitors were still beeping, the alarms still blaring. But every person in that trauma room stopped what they were doing. Stopped moving. Stopped breathing. Pierce blinked. His face was inches from Holloway's. Close enough to see the determination in the colonel's eyes. Close enough to smell the toxin on his breath. Close enough to see that this wasn't a delirious request. This wasn't confusion. This was a direct order from a man who was still very much in command. "What?" Pierce said. His voice was small, confused. "Sarah Jenkins," Holloway wheezed. His grip on Pierce's coat tightened. "Get her. Now." Pierce tried to pull back, but Holloway's grip was iron, unbreakable. "Sir, that nurse was fired for gross negligence, for protocol violations. She destroyed hospital property. She administered medication without authorization. She is unfit for medical practice. I assure you we have the best trauma team in the military medical system." "Screw your team," Holloway snarled. The venom in his voice cut through the room like a knife. "They can't get a simple IV in. I want Sarah Jenkins. You have 15 minutes, or I call the Joint Chiefs and tell them you let me die because of your damn ego." The threat hung in the air. Real, immediate, deadly serious. One of the military police stepped forward, a sergeant major. He was older than most of the operators in the room, maybe 50. His face was scarred. A line running from his left temple down to his jaw, a souvenir from Fallujah. He had a ranger tab on his shoulder. Combat infantry badge. Purple Heart. This was a man who'd been through the fire. "Sir, I'll find her," the sergeant major said. His voice was calm. Professional. He looked at Pierce. His eyes were hard. Where is she? Pierce's face was purple. Purple with rage. Purple with humiliation. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. He wanted to refuse. Wanted to assert his authority. Wanted to tell this soldier that he didn't take orders from patients. But he couldn't. Not with 20 witnesses watching. Not with armed special forces operators in the room. Not with Holloway gripping his coat. Not with the very real possibility that the colonel would make that call to the Joint Chiefs. Fine, Pierce spat. He yanked himself free from Holloway's grip. Someone find Jenkins. But when this goes wrong, when she makes a mistake, don't blame me. The sergeant major already had his phone out. He stepped out of the room, made a call. Within 90 seconds he had information. The military had resources, databases, access to records that civilians couldn't touch. Sarah Jenkins. Last known employment, Happy Paws Veterinary Clinic, Richmond, Virginia. Current location, still at the clinic, night shift. The sergeant major made another call, this time directly to Sarah. At Happy Paws Veterinary Clinic, Sarah was cleaning a surgical table. It was 11:45 at night. She should have been home hours ago, but a stray cat had come in with an infected wound. Marcus had needed help with the surgery. They'd cleaned the wound, stitched it up, given the cat antibiotics. Now the cat was sleeping in recovery. And Sarah was cleaning up. Her hands were moving on autopilot, wiping down the surgical table, disposing of the used instruments. Her mind was elsewhere, thinking about rent. About Betty's phone call, about the life she used to have. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. This late at night, it was usually a wrong number, or a spam call, but something made her reach for it. Unknown number. Hello? Is this Sarah Jenkins? The voice was gruff, military, the kind of voice that had barked orders across parade grounds and combat zones. Sarah's heart skipped. Who's asking? Sergeant Major Vance, United States Army Rangers. I'm standing in Riverside Military Medical Center with Colonel Jack Holloway. He's dying. He asked for you specifically. Can you get here in 20 minutes? Sarah nearly dropped the phone. Her mind went blank, then raced. Colonel Holloway. The name was familiar. She'd heard of him. Everyone in military medicine had heard of him. The wolf. The legend. Colonel Holloway asked for me? Her voice was barely a whisper. By name, ma'am. He said, and I quote, "Get me the nurse you people fired." That you? Sarah's breath caught. The nurse you people fired. He knew. Somehow he knew what had happened to her. Knew about Private Miller. Knew about Pierce. Yes, she said. That's me. Can you get here in 20 minutes? Sarah looked around the clinic, at Marcus watching her with concern from the doorway, at her veterinary scrubs covered in dog hair and cat dander and disinfectant, at the surgical table she'd been cleaning, at the life she'd built from the ashes of her career. Then she thought about Colonel Holloway dying in the hands of Dr. Gregory Pierce, the same man who destroyed her career, the same man who cared more about protocols than patients, the same man who'd almost let Private Miller die. History repeating itself. Except this time, it wasn't a 19-year-old private. It was a decorated war hero. A man who'd served his country for 30 years. A man who deserved better than Pierce's incompetence. I'll be there in 15, Sarah said. We're sending a police escort. It'll be there in 5 minutes. The line went dead. Sarah stood there for a moment, her phone still in her hand, her heart pounding. This was crazy. She'd been fired. Her license was flagged. She had no authority, no legal standing. If something went wrong, Pierce would destroy her. Again, but worse this time. But a man was dying, and he'd asked for her. By name. Marcus stepped into the room. Sarah, what's wrong? I have to go, Sarah said. She was already moving, running to the storage closet, pulling out her old nursing bag, the one she'd kept from her days at Riverside. She'd never quite been able to throw it away. Go where? Riverside. There's a patient. He needs me. Marcus understood. He'd been a medic. He knew that tone, that urgency. Go. I'll close up. Sarah grabbed her stethoscope, her good one, the Littman that Marcus had given her. She checked the bag, pen light, bandage scissors, a few basic supplies. Most of it was still there, waiting, like she'd known she'd need it again someday. She ran to the front door. The police SUV was already pulling up, lights flashing, no siren, but the urgency was clear. Marcus called after her, his voice strong, proud. Sarah, go save that soldier. Sarah didn't answer. She was already in the SUV, the door slamming shut. the vehicle accelerating before she'd even buckled her seatbelt. The ride to Riverside Military Medical Center was 12 minutes of pure adrenaline. The driver was a young cop, maybe 25. He drove like he was in a chase scene, running red lights, weaving through traffic, his siren clearing the way. Cars pulled over, pedestrians jumped back. The whole city seemed to part for them. Sarah sat in the back, her hands gripping her nursing bag, her heart racing, her mind going through scenarios, medical protocols, emergency procedures, everything she'd learned in 20 years of trauma medicine. But underneath the preparation was fear. Real fear. She hadn't worked trauma in 6 months. 6 months of cleaning dog kennels and holding scared puppies. What if she was rusty? What if her instincts were gone? What if she froze? What if Pierce was right? What if she really was incompetent? What if she'd saved Private Miller through dumb luck? What if this time she failed, and Colonel Holloway would die? Because she wasn't good enough. Because she'd been away too long. Because 6 months of scrubbing floors had eroded the skills that took 20 years to build. The doubt crept in, cold, insidious, whispering that she should tell the driver to turn around, that she wasn't ready, that she couldn't do this. But then she remembered Private Miller. She remembered his face turning blue, remembered his oxygen saturation dropping, remembered the moment she'd made the choice to act, to break the lock, to save his life despite the consequences. She remembered her hands, steady, precise, sliding that tube into place, saving a life. She remembered her training, combat zones, field hospitals, trauma wards, 20 years of experience, 20 years of saving lives. That didn't just disappear, that didn't fade in 6 months. She remembered who she was. Sarah Jenkins, combat nurse, trauma specialist, the woman who saved lives. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because it was right. The fear didn't go away. But it got quieter, smaller, pushed down by something stronger. Purpose, duty, the knowledge that a man was dying and he'd asked for her help. The SUV screeched to a halt outside Riverside Military Medical Center. The building loomed above her, glass and steel. The place where she'd worked for 3 years. The place where she'd been humiliated, fired, destroyed. Coming back here felt like walking into a nightmare. But she didn't have time for fear. Sarah jumped out of the SUV. Her vet clinic scrubs were covered in fur, cat hair, dog dander, stains from the surgery earlier. She probably smelled like animals and disinfectant. Her old stethoscope was around her neck. She looked nothing like a professional nurse. She looked exactly like what she was. Someone who'd been thrown away. Someone who'd survived. Someone who'd shown up anyway. She ran through the doors, into the lobby, past the reception desk, past the security checkpoint. The security guards turned, their hands going to their weapons. They didn't recognize her. 6 months ago, they would have waved her through. Now, she was a stranger in dirty scrubs running through their hospital. "Stop," one of them shouted. Then a voice cut through the tension, loud, commanding, military. "Stand down, she's with me." Sergeant Major Vance appeared. He was waiting for her. He'd been coordinating, making sure she could get through. His face was grim. Urgent. "This way. Ma'am, we don't have much time." Sarah followed him, running through the hallways, past the waiting rooms, past the departments she used to know. Everything was familiar but different, like walking through a memory, a ghost. They reached Trauma 1, the doors where she'd walked out 6 months ago, her career in a cardboard box, her badge on a metal tray, her dignity stripped away. Now she was walking back in, not in triumph, not in victory, but in desperate necessity. Sergeant Major Vance pushed open the doors. The scene inside was controlled chaos. Holloway was on the gurney. His skin was gray now, almost corpse-like. His oxygen saturation was dropping, 65%, 60%. The monitors were screaming. His chest was barely moving. Pierce was shouting orders, his voice high, panicked. The orders were contradictory, confusing. The staff was scrambling, running into each other, dropping instruments, making mistakes. The equipment was set up wrong. Sarah saw it immediately. The oxygen flow was too high. The cardiac monitor leads were misplaced. The IV drip was at the wrong rate. Everything was slightly off, and those small errors were compounding, making everything worse. Pierce looked like a man drowning, flailing, desperate. His white coat was stained with blood. His hair was disheveled. His face was red and sweating. This was a man losing control, losing his patient, losing everything. Sarah stopped just inside the door. She assessed the situation in 3 seconds. The training kicked in. 20 years of experience analyzing chaos and finding order. Finding the problem. Finding the solution. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Clear, calm, commanding. Everyone stop. The room froze. Every person turned, looked at her. This woman in dirty scrubs standing in the doorway. This ghost from 6 months ago. This nurse who was supposed to be gone. Pierce's face went from red to white. His eyes widened. His mouth opened. For a moment he couldn't speak, couldn't process. Sarah Jenkins, here, in his hospital, in his trauma room. And Sarah was already moving forward, already taking control, already doing what she did best, saving lives. The room froze. Every person stopped moving, stopped breathing. All eyes turned to Sarah Jenkins standing in the doorway. She looked nothing like the polished professional nurse they remembered. Her scrubs weren't the crisp hospital blues. They were faded veterinary greens, covered in dog hair, cat fur, stains from the surgery she'd done hours earlier. She smelled like animals and disinfectant. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup, no polish, no pretense. She looked like she'd been dragged out of a back alley clinic, which, essentially, she had been. But her eyes were sharp, focused, alert. The eyes of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The eyes of someone who'd seen worse, much worse, and survived. Pierce turned. His face went from white to red in about 2 seconds. Shock, then rage, pure undiluted rage. His mouth opened. His voice came out as a roar. "What the hell are you doing in my trauma bay?" Sarah didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. She walked forward, calm, steady. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "Colonel Holloway asked for me, so here I am." She moved past Pierce like he wasn't there, like he was furniture, an obstacle to step around. She went straight to the monitors, to the equipment, to the patient. One look, that's all it took. One professional assessment, 3 seconds of evaluation, and she saw everything that was wrong. "Jessica," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, matter of fact, not accusatory, just stating facts. "That IV drip rate is wrong. Holloway is in toxic shock. His blood vessels are constricted. You're pushing fluids too fast. You're making it worse." Jessica's face went pale. She looked at the IV pump, then at Sarah. She'd been following Pierce's orders exactly. But Sarah was right. The rate was too high. Sarah turned to another nurse, a young man named Kevin. "And you've got the oxygen flow backwards. The regulator's set wrong. That's why his saturation keeps spiking and dropping. You're giving him too much oxygen, then too little. His body can't adjust." Kevin looked at the oxygen setup. His face crumbled. He'd set it up exactly how Pierce had ordered, but Pierce had been wrong. Pierce's face was purple now, the veins in his neck bulging. "You have no authority here. You were fired. Your license is flagged. You are not a nurse at this hospital anymore." He looked at the security guards who'd followed Sarah in. "Security! Remove her! Now!" The guards stepped forward, but then they stopped because Sergeant Major Vance had moved, positioned himself between Sarah and them. His hand wasn't on his weapon, but the message was clear. "Touch her, and we have a problem." The Sergeant Major looked at Holloway, waiting for orders from the man who actually mattered. Colonel Holloway's eyes were locked on Sarah. He'd been watching her since she walked in, watching her assess the situation, watching her identify the problems, watching her take control. This was competence. Real competence. Not the performance that Pierce put on, not the theater of medicine, but the actual thing, the skill, the knowledge, the confidence that came from 20 years of experience. Holloway raised one shaking hand. It took effort. His arm was heavy. The toxin was still in his system. But he managed. He pointed at Sarah, direct, clear. Then he pointed at Pierce, and he made a cutting motion across his throat. The universal military signal. "Stand down. Shut up. Or else." The message was crystal clear. Sarah stays. Pierce shuts up. Or everyone here has a very big problem with the man who has the Joint Chiefs on speed dial. Pierce looked like he might actually have a stroke. His face was a color that shouldn't exist on a human being. But he stepped back, moved to the corner, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight, but silent. Sarah didn't waste time watching Pierce's tantrum. She rolled up her sleeves. "Someone get me proper saline. Normal saline, not the lactated ringers you're using. And I need epinephrine, atropine, and a new central line kit. Clean kit, sterile, move." The nurses scrambled. Some of them recognized Sarah from before, from 6 months ago when she'd been the head nurse, when this trauma bay had actually functioned, when patients didn't almost die from incompetence. They'd heard the stories, how she'd been fired for saving Private Miller, how Pierce had destroyed her career, how she'd disappeared. Some thought she'd left medicine entirely, gone to another city, another state. Now she was back, standing in her dirty vet scrubs, smelling like dog kennels, looking like she'd been through hell, but still here, still fighting, still saving lives. They moved with purpose now, real purpose. Not the panicked scrambling from before. They moved like a team that had direction, leadership, someone who actually knew what they were doing. Jessica grabbed the saline. Kevin fixed the oxygen flow. David prepped the central line kit. Another nurse cleared space around the gurney. They were responding to Sarah's calm authority, the quiet confidence that came from genuine skill. Sarah positioned herself next to Holloway. She looked down at him, at the gray face, the labored breathing, the monitor still screaming. He was stable compared to 2 minutes ago, but he was far from safe. The toxin was still killing him, just slower now. "Someone shut off those damn alarms," Sarah said. "I can hear the monitors. I don't need them screaming at me." A nurse silenced the alarms. Suddenly the room was quieter, calmer. People could think, could focus. Sarah pulled on sterile gloves, snapped them into place. The familiar feel, the muscle memory, 20 years of doing this. Her hands knew the movements, knew the routine. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's get to work." Sarah worked with the precision of a combat surgeon. Her hands didn't shake, not even slightly, not from nerves, not from fear, not from the weight of having a decorated war hero's life in her hands. Her voice was calm, clear, commanding, but not the way Pierce commanded, not through volume or anger, but through competence, through knowledge, through the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. She leaned down close to Holloway, close enough that only he could hear. Her voice was gentle, professional. "Colonel, I'm Sarah Jenkins. I'm going to stabilize you and reverse this neurotoxin. It's going to hurt like hell. I need to flush your system and the counteragents aren't pleasant. But I need you to stay with me. Can you do that?" Holloway's eyes focused on her face. He managed the tiniest nod, barely visible, but it was there. Trust. He was putting his life in her hands, completely, totally. Sarah nodded back, then she stood up, her voice louder now, addressing the team. "Jessica, I need you to prep the crash cart. Check the defibrillator. Make sure we have full medications. His heart is going to rebel when I push these counteragents, and I need to be ready." Jessica moved. Fast. Efficient. She knew how to prep a crash cart. She just needed direction. "David," Sarah continued, "start a new IV in his left arm. The veins are better there. Bigger. More stable. Use an 18 gauge. I need high flow capability." David was already moving, gathering supplies. "When I say push, you administer 1 milligram of epinephrine. Not before. Not after. Exactly when I say it. His timing is going to be critical. Clear?" "Clear," David said. "Everyone clear?" Sarah looked around the room, made eye contact with each person, made sure they understood. "Clear," they chorused. Sarah turned back to Holloway. She positioned herself for the central line insertion, the subclavian vein. It was a dangerous procedure. Get it wrong, and you could puncture a lung. Hit the artery instead of the vein, cause a pneumothorax. Kill the patient you were trying to save. But get it right, and you had direct access to the central circulation. Fast medication delivery, rapid fluid resuscitation. It was the difference between life and death in critical cases. Sarah's hands moved with absolute certainty. She palpated the landmarks, found the exact spot, inserted the needle at the precise angle. One smooth motion. No hesitation. No second guessing. She felt the pop as the needle entered the vein, saw the flash of blood. Dark venous blood. Perfect placement. "I'm in," she said calmly. She threaded the catheter, removed the needle, connected the IV line, secured it with practiced efficiency. The whole procedure took maybe 45 seconds. Pierce had fumbled with it for 5 minutes and never gotten it right. "Fluids wide open," Sarah ordered. "Jessica, start the epinephrine drip. 0.1 mics per kilo per minute." Jessica's hands were steady now. She had direction. Purpose. She started the drip. Sarah adjusted the oxygen flow. Not too much, not too little, just right. She checked the cardiac monitor leads, repositioned 2 of them. Suddenly the EKG was clearer, the rhythm more visible. She pulled out a vial from her bag, the counteragent for organophosphate poisoning. It was her best guess at what toxin was affecting Holloway. The symptoms matched: seizures, respiratory distress, excessive secretions. Classic organophosphate poisoning, probably from some chemical weapon exposure on his last mission. "This is atropine," Sarah explained. To Holloway, to the team. "It's going to block the effects of the toxin, but it's going to feel wrong. Your mouth will go dry, your heart will race, you might feel like you can't breathe even though you can. Trust me. Trust the process." Holloway's eyes said he understood. He trusted her. Completely. Sarah pushed the atropine, slowly. Watching Holloway's response, watching the monitors, his heart rate increased, the bradycardia reversed, his secretions decreased, his breathing eased slightly. Good signs. She was right about the toxin. She administered a second medication, pralidoxime, a specific antidote for organophosphate poisoning. It would reactivate the enzymes that the toxin had blocked, allow his nervous system to start functioning normally again. "David, now, push the epi." David pushed 1 milligram of epinephrine. Holloway's body jerked slightly, the medication hitting his system. His heart rate spiked, then settled. His blood pressure started to climb. Sarah worked systematically. She administered a third medication, a fourth, each one targeting a different aspect of the poisoning. Each one carefully calculated, perfectly timed. She worked around complications that would have stopped less experienced practitioners. Holloway's blood pressure spiked too high. Sarah adjusted the medications. It dropped too low. She corrected. His heart rhythm became irregular. She administered antiarrhythmics. It stabilized. She made micro adjustments that the new nurses would never have thought of. Tiny changes to the oxygen flow, minor modifications to the IV drip rates, small repositionings of his body to improve circulation. Every movement was purposeful, precise, the result of 20 years of experience, of seeing every complication, every variation, every way a patient could die and every way to prevent it. The room watched in something close to awe. This was what real trauma medicine looked like. Not the chaos from before, not the panic, but controlled, systematic, professional. Pierce stood in the corner, watching, his face unreadable. But inside, he was dying, because he was seeing what he could never be, what he'd never been. A real doctor, a real healer, someone who actually cared about the patient more than their own ego. 15 minutes passed, felt like hours, felt like seconds. Time had that weird quality in trauma situations, stretched and compressed simultaneously. Then the monitors changed, the heart rate stabilized, steady, strong, normal sinus rhythm. The blood pressure began to climb, 70/40. Then 80/50, then 90/60, back into normal range. The oxygen saturation improved, 75%, 80, 85, 90, 95, normal. Holloway's color began to return, the gray fading, pink appearing in his cheeks, his lips, his nail beds. His breathing eased, the gasping stopped, the chest rose and fell smoothly, regularly. The room released a collective breath. Everyone had been holding it, watching, waiting, praying. Sarah stepped back. Her scrubs were soaked with sweat now. Her hair was falling out of the ponytail. Her hands were steady, but there was blood on her gloves. Holloway's blood from the IV insertions. She looked at the monitors, then at Holloway, then at the team. "He's stable," Sarah said. Her voice was quiet but carried through the room. "But he's not out of the woods yet. He needs continuous monitoring for the next 48 hours. This toxin is going to work its way out of his system slowly. He could crash again. You need to check his cardiac enzymes every 4 hours. Watch for organ damage, the kidneys especially. And someone needs to manually check his pupils and neurostatus every 30 minutes for the next 12 hours. Organophosphate poisoning can cause delayed neurological effects. Do you have anyone here who can do that?" Pierce opened his mouth, finally finding his voice, ready to assert his authority again. "I'll assign someone too?" But Jessica spoke first. She stepped forward. Her face was set, determined. "I can. I did it in my ICU rotation, at Johns Hopkins, 6 months of neuro-ICU. Sarah, I can do it. I want to do it." Sarah studied her, really looked at her. Jessica was young, inexperienced, but she was also willing to learn, willing to admit what she didn't know, willing to be taught. That was more important than experience sometimes, the willingness to learn. Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll walk you through it, step by step. You're going to check his pupils every 30 minutes, Look for changes in size, shape, reactivity. You're going to do a full neuro exam. Motor function, sensory function, reflexes. I'm going to teach you what normal looks like and what abnormal looks like. And if you see anything abnormal, anything at all, you page me immediately. Understood? Understood, Jessica said. Her voice was firm, committed. Good. Sarah looked around the room, at the other nurses, at David, at Kevin, at the residents. Anyone else want to learn? Real trauma medicine? Not the protocol-following robot medicine. The actual medicine? Hands went up. 4 nurses, 2 residents. They wanted to learn, wanted to be better. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Hope, maybe, or purpose. She'd missed this. Teaching, mentoring, building a real team. For the next 2 hours, Sarah supervised Colonel Holloway's care. She didn't leave, didn't take a break, stayed right there in Trauma 1, watching, teaching, guiding. She taught the willing nurses the techniques they should have known. How to properly assess a critical patient, how to spot the subtle signs of deterioration before they became obvious, how to anticipate complications, how to work as a team instead of individuals following orders. She corrected errors before they became fatal. Small mistakes, a monitor lead placed slightly wrong, an IV drip rate calculated incorrectly, a medication dosage that was close but not quite right, things that most people wouldn't notice, things that could kill a patient over hours instead of minutes. She was everything Pierce pretended to be, knowledgeable, confident, skilled, but also humble, patient, willing to teach, willing to admit when she didn't know something. She showed Jessica how to do the neuro exams, demonstrated on Holloway, explained what each finding meant, what to look for, what was normal variation, and what was a red flag. She walked David through the proper technique for blood draws, how to find veins on patients in shock, how to avoid contaminating samples, how to prioritize which tests to run first. She helped Kevin understand the oxygen delivery systems, how to adjust for different patient needs, when to increase flow, when to decrease, how to read the patient instead of just the numbers on the monitor. The nurses absorbed it like sponges. They'd been starving for this kind of teaching. Pierce never taught, he just ordered, expected perfection without providing guidance, blamed mistakes without explaining how to avoid them. Sarah was different. She explained the why behind every action, the reasoning, the science. She made them think, made them understand, and slowly, the trauma team started to function again, like it had when Sarah was head nurse. Like a real team, instead of a collection of scared individuals. Pierce stood in the corner, invisible, irrelevant. His staff no longer looked to him for direction. They looked to Sarah. Even when Pierce tried to give an order, they'd glance at Sarah first, checking, making sure it was the right call. It was humiliating, emasculating. Everything Pierce had built over the past 6 months was crumbling. His authority, his control, his image as the genius doctor. Even the hospital administrators who'd arrived were watching Sarah with respect, with awe. The CEO had shown up an hour ago, a board member 30 minutes ago. They'd come expecting to see Pierce save a national hero, build his legend, cement his Surgeon General nomination. Instead, they were watching a fired nurse in dirty vet scrubs do what their chief medical officer couldn't: save a life, lead a team, demonstrate actual competence. The CEO was taking notes. The board member was on his phone, making calls, quiet calls, concerned calls. Pierce could feel his world ending, slowly, piece by piece, everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, crumbling. Finally, after 2 hours, Holloway was stable enough to speak. His voice was weak, rough, like sandpaper on concrete, but clear, coherent. Sarah. Sarah was at his side immediately. She leaned down, close enough to hear. "Yes, sir. You saved my life. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, a fact. I did my job, sir." Sarah's voice was quiet, humble. "Why?" Holloway asked. His eyes searched her face. "After what they did to you? After Pierce destroyed your career? Why did you come?" Sarah looked Holloway in the eyes, direct, honest. "Because you needed help, because that's what I do. Because no one deserves to die because of someone else's ego." Holloway managed a small smile, painful but genuine. "I read your file. 6 months ago, after you were fired, they said you were insubordinate, reckless, a danger to patients." "They were right," Sarah said simply. "I am insubordinate. I don't follow bad orders. I don't follow protocols that kill people. I never will." "Good," Holloway whispered. His voice was getting stronger, The toxin fading, his body recovering. Never change that. The military needs people like you. People who think, people who question, people who care more about doing what's right than doing what they're told. He took a breath, then louder, loud enough for the whole room to hear. His voice carrying, the command voice, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. I want a full investigation into this hospital. He looked around the room, at Pierce, at the administrators, at everyone. I want to know why Sarah Jenkins was fired for saving a soldier's life. I want to know what protocols led to that decision. I want to know why I almost died in the hands of what's supposed to be the best medical team in the country. The room went silent, dead silent. I want every patient death in the last 6 months reviewed, every complication, every mistake. I want to know if there's a pattern, if other people died because experienced nurses were pushed out and replaced with inexperienced staff. The CEO's face went pale. And I want to know about Dr. Pierce's protocols, his electronic drug locks, his authorization requirements. I want to know how many delays they caused, how many complications, how many deaths. Pierce's face was white now, completely white, like all the blood had drained away. I'll be contacting the Inspector General, the Surgeon General, the Secretary of Defense, and the Joint Chiefs. This hospital treats military personnel, active duty soldiers, war heroes. If there's systematic negligence, if there's corruption, if there's incompetence being covered up, we're going to find it. Holloway looked directly at Pierce, his blue eyes hard, cold, unforgiving. And if I find out that people died because of your ego, Dr. Pierce, I'm going to make it my personal mission to ensure you never practice medicine again. Not at a military hospital, not at a civilian hospital, not at a veterinary clinic, nowhere. Pierce's mouth opened, closed. No words came out. For once in his life, Dr. Gregory Pierce had nothing to say. Sarah stood there, watching. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just sadness. Sadness for the patients who'd suffered, for the nurses who'd been fired or quit, for the system that had allowed this to happen. But underneath the sadness was something else, something harder. Hope, maybe, that things would change, that justice would happen, that doing the right thing would finally matter. She looked at Holloway, at the man who'd almost died, who was now alive because he'd trusted her, because he'd remembered her name. "Thank you, sir," Sarah said quietly. "No," Holloway said. "Thank you. You saved my life. I won't forget that, ever." Sarah nodded. She looked around the trauma room, at the nurses she'd taught, at the team that was starting to function again, at the possibility of redemption. Maybe this wasn't over. Maybe her career wasn't destroyed. Maybe there was a way forward. But first, there was going to be an investigation and a reckoning. And Dr. Gregory Pierce was going to face the consequences of his actions. Finally, 2 weeks later, Riverside Military Medical Center looked like a crime scene. Federal investigators swarmed every floor, every department, every office. Men and women in dark suits with badges and briefcases, they moved through the hospital like a controlled invasion, systematic, thorough, relentless. They seized medical records, boxes and boxes of patient files, treatment protocols, incident reports, everything going back 18 months, 2 years. Further, they seized financial documents, budget reports, purchasing orders, vendor contracts, bank statements, everything that showed where money came from and where it went. They interviewed staff, nurses, doctors, residents, administrators, janitors, security guards, anyone who'd worked at Riverside in the past year. The interviews happened in small offices, conference rooms, empty patient rooms, quiet, private, recorded. And the more they dug, the worse it got. The initial investigation was supposed to be about Sarah's firing, a wrongful termination case, maybe some civil rights violations, nothing major, nothing that would make headlines. But then they started finding other things, patterns, inconsistencies, red flags that had nothing to do with Sarah Jenkins and everything to do with systematic corruption. Sarah was sitting in a temporary hospital office on the 3rd floor, a small room that used to be a supply closet. Now it held a desk, 2 chairs, and a federal investigator named Agent Morrison. Agent Morrison was mid-40s, former military. You could tell by the way he sat, the way he spoke. Short hair, clean-shaven, direct questions, no small talk. He'd been interviewing Sarah for 2 hours, going through every detail of her firing, every interaction with Dr. Pierce, every protocol violation she'd witnessed. Sarah was tired, emotionally exhausted, reliving that day 6 months ago. The day she'd saved Private Miller. The day she'd lost everything. "And Dr. Pierce explicitly told you that you'd be fired if you bypassed the lock?" Agent Morrison asked. His pen was poised over his notepad. Yes, he'd said it multiple times, in staff meetings, in emails. He was very clear about. The door burst open. Betty rushed in. Her face was flushed. Her eyes were wide. She was holding a flash drive in her hand like it was a live grenade. Her hands were shaking. "Sarah, you need to see this." Betty's voice was breathless. Urgent. "You need to see this right now." Agent Morrison stood up, his hand instinctively going to his belt, where his weapon would be. "Ma'am, this is a closed interview. You can't." "I work here," Betty interrupted. "Worked here? I'm Betty Chen. I was Sarah's colleague. I have evidence, important evidence." She thrust the flash drive at Sarah. Sarah took it. The small piece of plastic and metal was warm from Betty's grip. "What is this?" Sarah asked. "Financial records, email chains. I've been collecting them for months." Betty was talking fast, words tumbling over each other. "Ever since you were fired, ever since I saw what Pierce was doing, I knew something was wrong. I knew it wasn't just about you. So I started digging, quietly, carefully, and I found things. Terrible things." Agent Morrison moved around the desk, professional now, investigator mode. "What kind of things?" Betty looked at him, then at Sarah. "Pierce has been taking kickbacks from MedTech Solutions, the medical equipment company." Sarah's blood ran cold. She looked down at the flash drive in her hand. "What?" "That's why he implemented the electronic drug lock system," Betty said. Her voice was steadier now, more controlled, but underneath was rage. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about preventing theft. It was about forcing the hospital to buy expensive proprietary equipment from his brother-in-law's company. Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. His brother-in-law? Thomas Pierce, Gregory's younger brother, changed his last name to his wife's maiden name. Thomas Sullivan, CEO of MedTech Solutions. They make the electronic locks, the monitoring systems, all the expensive equipment that Pierce mandated. The hospital paid millions for it, and Pierce got a percentage, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees. Agent Morrison took the flash drive from Sarah. "How much? Over the past 18 months? Nearly $2 million. Betty pulled out her phone, showed them screenshots, bank statements, wire transfers, payments from offshore accounts. "He hid it well. Shell companies, consulting contracts. But I traced it. It's all there." Sarah couldn't breathe. $2 million. Pierce had destroyed her career, destroyed other nurses' careers, let patients die, all for money, for greed. Agent Morrison was already moving, pulling out his phone, making calls. "I need forensic accountants here immediately, and get me the fraud division." But Betty wasn't done. She looked at Sarah. Her eyes were wet now, tears starting to form. "It gets worse." "Worse than corruption?" Sarah asked. "Worse than kickbacks?" "Pierce has been covering up patient deaths." Betty's voice broke. 11 patients have died in the last 6 months. 6 months since you were fired, since the experienced nurses left, since the new protocols were implemented. The room spun. Sarah grabbed the desk to steady herself. 11? 11 confirmed. Maybe more. I only found the ones where there were clear protocol violations, clear mistakes, patients who should have survived but didn't, because of delays, because of the electronic locks, because the inexperienced staff couldn't handle complex emergencies. Betty pulled up more files on her phone. Medical records, incident reports. He blamed the deaths on the nurses. Falsified autopsy reports, changed medical records, made it look like patient complications instead of medical negligence. Agent Morrison was writing furiously. "You have proof of this?" "Everything's on the drive. Medical records, the original versions before Pierce altered them. Email chains showing him ordering staff to change documentation. Audio recordings from staff meetings where he blamed nurses for deaths that were clearly his fault." "Audio recordings?" Agent Morrison looked up sharply. Betty nodded. "I've been recording everything for 3 months, ever since the mother of 3 almost died. The woman I told you about, Sarah. I knew then that Pierce was going to keep killing people, and I knew nobody would believe us without evidence, so I collected it." Sarah looked at Betty, really looked at her. This woman had risked everything, her job, her career, possibly her freedom if Pierce had found out. She'd been walking around with evidence of federal crimes, recording her boss. stealing documents, all to expose the truth. Betty, you could have been arrested if Pierce had found out. I know, Betty said. Her voice was quiet now, resigned. But after seeing you save Colonel Holloway while Pierce stood there useless, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I couldn't watch him get promoted, get nominated for Surgeon General, become even more powerful, while patients died and nurses got blamed. She looked at Agent Morrison. He blamed at least 3 of those deaths on nurses who wouldn't play along, who questioned his protocols, who filed incident reports. He destroyed their careers just like he destroyed Sarah's, flagged their licenses, made sure they'd never work in medicine again. Agent Morrison's face was grim. Names. I need names of the nurses and the patients. Betty handed over her phone. It's all documented. Everything. The investigator scrolled through the files, his expression getting darker with each page. Jesus Christ, this isn't just wrongful termination. This is criminal conspiracy, medical fraud, manslaughter, maybe even murder if we can prove intent. He looked up at Betty. You need to come with me, full statement, every detail. And you, he looked at Sarah, you need to stay available. This case just got a lot bigger. Sarah sat down. Her legs couldn't hold her anymore. 11 people. 11 patients dead. Because of Pierce's greed. Because of his ego. Because he cared more about money than lives. She thought about Private Miller, the 19-year-old kid she'd saved. She'd lost her career saving 1 life. But in losing her career, 11 others had died. Because the experienced nurses were gone. Because the system was broken. Because Pierce had been allowed to continue. I should have fought harder, Sarah whispered. I should have reported him. Should have. You did report him, Betty said firmly. You filed complaints. You told the board. They ignored you. They chose his money over your warnings. This isn't your fault, Sarah. This is on them. On Pierce. On the system that protected him. Agent Morrison was on his phone again. More calls. More investigators. The case was expanding by the minute. Sarah looked at the flash drive in his hand. Such a small thing. A few ounces of plastic and metal. But it contained the evidence that would bring down Dr. Gregory Pierce. That would expose the corruption. That would finally bring justice. She hoped. She prayed. She needed it to be true. Because 11 people had died, and someone needed to answer for that. 48 hours later, Dr. Gregory Pierce was in his office. The big office on the top floor. The one with floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of the river. The one that came with being chief medical officer. He was at his desk. Expensive mahogany. Custom-made. There were papers spread out in front of him. Legal documents. His lawyer had been here an hour ago. Going over options, defense strategies, how to spin this. The investigation was a witch hunt, his lawyer said. Overzealous federal agents looking to make headlines. They had nothing concrete. Just accusations from disgruntled former employees. It would blow over. These things always did. Pierce wanted to believe that. Needed to believe that, because the alternative was unthinkable. Prison, losing his medical license, losing everything he'd built. He was planning. Maybe planning his defense, maybe planning his escape. He had money, offshore accounts, connections. He could disappear if he needed to. Start over somewhere else, a different country, a different name. The door burst open, not knocked, not opened politely, burst. FBI agents flooded into his office, 6 of them. Dark suits, badges, weapons drawn. They moved with practiced efficiency, spreading out, securing the room, making sure there was no escape. Agent Morrison was in front. Dr. Gregory Pierce? Pierce stood up, his face going white, then red. What is the meaning of this? You can't just... Dr. Gregory Pierce, you're under arrest. Agent Morrison's voice was flat, professional. He'd done this 1,000 times. Fraud, medical malpractice, voluntary manslaughter, conspiracy, falsifying federal documents. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. This is outrageous. Pierce's voice was shrill now. Panicked. I'm the chief medical officer of this hospital. I'm a nominee for Surgeon General. You can't. Turn around, hands behind your back. 2 agents moved in. They weren't rough, but they weren't gentle either. They spun Pierce around, pulled his arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked into place, cold metal against his wrists. Pierce was sputtering. I want my lawyer. I want to speak to the hospital board. This is a mistake. I've done nothing wrong. You have the right to an attorney, Agent Morrison continued, ignoring the outburst. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have explained them to you? I understand that this is a gross miscarriage of justice. I understand that you're destroying an innocent man's career. I understand. Do you understand your rights, Dr. Pierce?" Agent Morrison's voice was harder now, less patient. Pierce deflated slightly. "Yes, I understand. Good, let's go." They led him out of his office, past his desk, past his diplomas on the wall, past the photographs of him shaking hands with senators and generals, past all the trappings of success. Into the hallway. The hallway was lined with people, hospital staff, nurses, doctors, administrators. Word had spread fast. FBI in the building, the CMO being arrested. Everyone had come to watch. Sarah was there, standing near the elevator. She hadn't planned to be, hadn't wanted to be. But Agent Morrison had called her, asked her to come, said she deserved to see this. Pierce saw her. His eyes locked onto her face. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The agents, the handcuffs, the crowd. It was just him and Sarah. He looked like he wanted to say something. His mouth opened, words forming. Maybe an apology. Maybe he was going to say he was sorry. Sorry for destroying her career. Sorry for the patients who died. Sorry for everything. Or maybe he was going to curse her, blame her. Say this was all her fault. That she'd turned everyone against him. That she'd ruined him. Sarah would never know. Because in the end, Pierce said nothing. His mouth closed. His eyes dropped. He looked away. The agents led him to the elevator. The doors opened. They pushed him inside. The doors closed. He was gone. The hallway erupted. People talking, whispering, shocked, excited, horrified. The chief medical officer arrested, led away in handcuffs. It was unprecedented, unthinkable. Sarah just stood there, watching the closed elevator doors. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, no vindication. Just sadness, bone-deep sadness. How many patients had suffered because of his ego? How many nurses had been destroyed? How many families had lost loved ones? Betty appeared beside her, put a hand on her shoulder. "It's over." "Is it?" Sarah asked. "Those 11 people are still dead. The nurses he destroyed are still out of work. Private Miller almost died. Colonel Holloway almost died. Getting Pierce arrested doesn't undo any of that." "No," Betty agreed, "but it stops him from hurting anyone else. That's something." Sarah nodded slowly. It was something. Not everything, not enough, but something. She turned away from the elevator. Time to go. Time to leave this place. Again, but this time it was different. This time she was walking out with her head high, with justice being served, with the truth finally exposed. This time she was walking out a hero, not a villain. With Pierce gone, the hospital board moved quickly, incredibly quickly, like they'd been waiting for this, planning for it. New leadership was brought in within days. A new chief medical officer from Johns Hopkins. A woman with an impeccable reputation. Dr. Elizabeth Chen. No relation to Betty, but someone who'd built her career on patient safety and ethical medicine. New safety protocols were implemented. The electronic drug locks were removed, all of them, replaced with a more sensible system, one that balanced security with accessibility, one that wouldn't kill patients. The administrators who'd enabled Pierce were fired, the ones who'd ignored complaints, who'd signed off on his protocols, who'd prioritized money over safety. 5 of them, gone in one day. The board issued a public apology, a real one, not a corporate PR statement. An actual admission of fault. They'd failed their patients, failed their staff, failed their mission. And they offered Sarah her job back, not just her old position as head nurse, not just a reinstatement with an apology. They offered her Pierce's job, head of emergency medicine, the position he'd held, the position he'd abused, $450,000 a year, full benefits, health insurance, dental, vision, pension, everything. Her choice of staff. Complete autonomy over hiring and firing. Full authority to implement new protocols. No oversight from administrators. No bureaucratic interference. It was everything. More than everything. It was vindication. It was justice. It was the universe saying, you were right all along. Sarah sat in the new CEO's office. A different office than before. A different CEO. The old one had resigned or been forced out. The details were unclear. The contract was on the desk in front of her. Thick, professional, lawyer vetted, real. The new CEO, a man named Robert Harrison, sat across from her. He was older, 60-something, gray hair, Kind eyes. He'd been brought in specifically to clean up the mess, to restore trust, to rebuild. "This is everything you deserve," Harrison said. His voice was genuine, warm, not the corporate smoothness of the previous administration. "After what you've been through, after what you've done, saving Private Miller, saving Colonel Holloway, exposing the corruption, you're a hero, Sarah. This hospital needs you. The patients need you. Please, we need you." Sarah looked at the contract, at the numbers, at the title, Head of Emergency Medicine. Her name would go on the door. Her policies would be implemented. She could build the department the way it should be, the way she'd always wanted. She thought about the soldiers who would be helped, the young privates like Miller, the decorated colonels like Holloway, all the service members who came through those doors needing real care, real medicine. They deserved the best. They deserved a system that worked. She thought about the nurses who would be trained properly, not the way Pierce had done it, not through fear and intimidation, but through mentorship, through teaching, through building a real team. She could create that. She could train the next generation the right way. She thought about preventing another Pierce from rising, someone else with an ego bigger than their ethics, someone else who cared more about money than lives. With this position, she could stop that. She could build safeguards, create a culture where people like Pierce couldn't survive, let alone thrive. It was everything she'd wanted, everything she'd worked for 20 years. But she also thought about Happy Paws, about Marcus, the gruff old Vietnam vet who'd given her a job when nobody else would, who'd paid her in cash, who'd taught her that showing up was sometimes enough. She thought about the stray dogs and rescue cats, the animals that nobody else wanted, the ones who came in sick and scared and broken. She'd helped them, made a difference. It wasn't prestigious, it wasn't well paid, but it mattered. She thought about the beagle with the broken leg, the cat with the infected wound, the endless parade of creatures who needed help, who needed someone to care. Marcus couldn't do it alone. He was 67 years old. His knees were shot, his hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Could she leave him? Leave them? Go back to the place that had destroyed her? Even if it was different now? Even if Pierce was gone? "Can I have some time to think about it?" Sarah asked. 48 hours? Harrison nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, this offer won't be available forever. We need to fill this position. We need stability. We need leadership." "I understand," Sarah said. "Just 48 hours. I promise I'll have an answer." She left the hospital, drove back to her tiny apartment, the one she'd been living in for 6 months. The place with the broken water heater and the loud neighbors, the place she could finally afford to leave. That night, Sarah sat on her tiny balcony. It was barely 4 feet wide, just enough room for a cheap plastic chair and a small table. But it had a view. You could see the city lights, the river in the distance, the hospital where she used to work, where she might work again. The night was cool, clear. Stars were visible despite the city lights. Sarah sat there with a cup of tea, thinking. Wrestling, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. "Colonel Holloway," she answered. "Colonel?" "Sarah." His voice was stronger now, much stronger than 2 weeks ago when he'd been dying on that gurney. "I heard they offered you Pierce's position." News traveled fast. "They did." "Are you going to take it?" Sarah hesitated, looked out at the city, at the lights, at the hospital in the distance. "I don't know. Talk to me. What's holding you back?" Sarah took a breath. "That place took everything from me once, destroyed my career, my reputation, my life. And yes, Pierce is gone now. Yes, they apologized. Yes, they're offering me everything I could want. But can I really go back there? Can I trust them? What happens when the next crisis comes, when the next difficult decision has to be made? Will they stand by me, or will they throw me away again?" Holloway was quiet for a moment. Then, "Those are fair questions, valid concerns. You have every reason to be cautious. And there's Marcus, the vet clinic. He gave me a job when nobody else would. He didn't care about my flagged license or my destroyed reputation. He just cared that I showed up, that I tried. I can't just abandon him." "Also fair," Holloway said. "But Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What do you want? Not what you think you should want. Not what's safe or comfortable or loyal. What do you actually want?" Deep down, Sarah closed her eyes. The question hit harder than she expected. What did she want? She wanted to practice medicine, real medicine. She wanted to train nurses, build teams, save lives. She wanted to make a difference, a big difference. Not just one cat or one dog at a time, but dozens of patients, hundreds, thousands over the course of a career. She wanted to fix the system, make it better, prevent future Pierces, create a culture of safety and ethics and patient-centered care. But she also wanted peace, safety, a place where she wouldn't have to fight every day, where she wouldn't have to watch her back, where she could just help and not worry about politics or egos or betrayal. I don't know, Sarah said honestly. I want both. I want to go back to real medicine, but I want to feel safe doing it. You'll never feel completely safe, Holloway said. Not after what you've been through. But Sarah, I didn't call just to ask about your decision. I called because I have a counteroffer. Sarah sat up straighter. A counteroffer? Yes, but I want you to think about the hospital's offer seriously first. Really consider it. Don't dismiss it out of fear, and then in 48 hours call me back. I'll tell you my offer, and you can make an informed choice. Deal? Sarah smiled slightly. You're being very mysterious, Colonel. I'm being strategic, Holloway said. 48 hours, Sarah. Think hard, then call me. The line went dead. Sarah sat there on her balcony, looking at the city, at the hospital, at the life she used to have and the life she might have again. She had 48 hours to decide. 48 hours to choose her future. The night stretched out before her, full of possibilities, full of questions, full of hope and fear in equal measure. She sipped her tea and thought, really thought, about what she wanted, about what mattered, about who she was and who she wanted to be. The answer would come, eventually. She just had to listen, really listen, to her heart, to her instincts, to the voice inside that had guided her through 20 years of medicine, through combat zones and trauma wards and impossible choices. That voice had never steered her wrong, even when it cost her everything, even when it led her to break the lock and save Private Miller, even when it led her to answer Holloway's call. It would guide her now. She just had to trust it. 48 hours. Then she'd know. Then she'd decide. Then her future would begin. Whatever that future might be. 3 days later, Sarah Jenkins stood in a Pentagon briefing room. Not just any briefing room. This was one of the secure rooms, deep in the building. The kind of room where classified missions were planned, where wars were strategized, where decisions that changed the world were made. The room was austere. A long conference table, American flag in the corner, seal of the Department of Defense on the wall. No windows, no natural light. Just the harsh fluorescent glow that made everyone look slightly gray. But Sarah wasn't looking at the room. She was looking at the people in it. Colonel Jack Holloway sat at the head of the table. He was fully recovered now. The gray pallor was gone. The weakness was gone. He looked strong, healthy, powerful, back in his dress uniform. The dark blue with the rows of ribbons on his chest, the silver eagles on his shoulders, the Ranger tab, the Special Forces tab, the combat patches, a walking history of 30 years of service. Next to him sat the Surgeon General of the United States, Vice Admiral Patricia Reynolds, a woman in her early 60s, sharp eyes, gray hair, cut short. She had the look of someone who'd been a surgeon before becoming an administrator, someone who still remembered what it was like to hold a scalpel, to save a life. And on either side were 2 four-star generals. General Marcus Webb from the Army, General Christina Okoye from the Air Force, both in their late 50s, both with enough ribbons and medals to weigh down a smaller person, both with the kind of presence that made rooms go quiet when they walked in. This was power, real power, the kind that commanded armies, that advised presidents, that shaped policy. And they were all looking at Sarah. Sarah stood at the opposite end of the table, still in civilian clothes, jeans, a simple blouse, nothing fancy. She'd come straight from Happy Paws. There'd been an emergency, a dog hit by a car. She and Marcus had operated for 3 hours, saved the dog's leg. She still had dog hair on her jeans. She felt completely out of place, a fired nurse in a room full of generals. But she stood tall, head high, the way Marcus had taught her, the way 20 years of military medicine had taught her. Holloway spoke first. His voice was warm, genuine. Sarah Jenkins, thank you for coming. You didn't give me much choice, Colonel, Sarah said with a slight smile. When a decorated war hero says come to the Pentagon, you don't say no. Holloway smiled. Fair point. Sarah, I want to start by thanking you again. You saved my life. I owe you a debt I can never repay. You don't owe me anything, sir. I did my job. You did more than your job, Admiral Reynolds interjected. Her voice was crisp, professional. You exposed systematic corruption. You prevented future deaths. You demonstrated the kind of integrity and courage that we desperately need in military medicine. General Webb nodded. We've completed our investigation into Riverside Military Medical Center. What we found was disturbing. Dr. Pierce's corruption was worse than we initially thought, but it wasn't isolated. We found similar patterns at 3 other military medical facilities. Kickbacks, falsified records, experienced staff being pushed out in favor of cheaper, less competent replacements. Sarah's stomach turned. 3 other hospitals? At minimum, General Okoye said. We suspect there are more. The system is broken, Ms. Jenkins, and we need people like you to fix it. Holloway leaned forward. Sarah, you saved my life, but more than that, you showed me something. You showed me what integrity looks like, what competence looks like, what it means to put patients before politics, before money, before ego. And I realized something. We need more of that. We need to systematize it, make it the standard instead of the exception. He slid a folder across the table. It moved smoothly over the polished wood, stopped directly in front of Sarah. She picked it up, opened it. Inside were official documents, Department of Defense letterhead, detailed proposals, organizational charts, budget projections. I want you to head a new division, Holloway said. The Medical Accountability and Training Division, MATD. Your job will be to audit military hospitals nationwide, train medical staff, root out corruption before it kills people, implement new safety protocols, create a culture of accountability. Sarah's eyes widened as she read. This wasn't a small project. This was massive, comprehensive, system-wide reform. You'll have unlimited resources, Admiral Reynolds added. Within reason, of course, but we're talking about a $50 million annual budget. Staff, equipment, authority. Full authority, General Webb emphasized. You can fire anyone, doctors, administrators, anyone who's not meeting standards, anyone who's compromising patient safety. You report directly to Colonel Holloway. No bureaucratic interference, no administrative roadblocks. Sarah looked up from the folder. You want me to fix military medicine? Nationwide? I want you to fix the system, Holloway said. His voice was intense, passionate. Not just at Riverside, not just at the 3 other hospitals we found, but everywhere. I want you to find the corrupt doctors before they hurt people. I want you to train nurses to do it right, to speak up, to act. I want you to create protocols that actually work, that balance safety with accessibility, that don't kill patients in the name of security. He leaned back. I want you to make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else, that no nurse is ever fired for saving a life, that no patient ever dies because someone cared more about protocols than people. Sarah looked down at the contract. The numbers were staggering. $280,000 a year. Full federal benefits, health insurance, dental, vision, government pension, retirement contributions, job security. More than money, though. This was purpose, real purpose. This was a chance to change the system, to fix what was broken, to prevent future tragedies, to build something that would last beyond her, that would save lives for decades. There's one condition, Holloway added. His eyes locked on hers. You don't work alone. You build a team. Your team, people you trust, people who share your values, people who care about patients more than prestige or politics. Sarah thought about Betty, the woman who'd risked everything to collect evidence against Pierce, who'd worn a wire, who documented the corruption even when it could have destroyed her career, ended her freedom. She thought about Jessica, the young nurse who'd fumbled with the IV line, who'd been more interested in impressing Pierce than helping patients, but who'd changed. Who'd learned, who'd proven herself when it mattered. She thought about the 5 other nurses who'd quit Riverside in protest, who'd sacrificed their careers rather than compromise their ethics, who were now working at veterinary clinics or retail stores or anywhere that would hire them. Good nurses, skilled nurses, ethical nurses, all pushed out by a broken system. She thought about all the medical professionals who'd been silenced, punished, destroyed, for doing the right thing, for speaking up, for putting patients first. This was a chance to bring them back, to give them purpose again. to build something better, together. Sarah looked up, met Holloway's eyes, then Admiral Reynolds's, then the General's. I accept, Holloway smiled. A real smile, warm, genuine, relieved. Thank you, Sarah, you won't regret this. When do I start? Immediately, Admiral Reynolds said. We've already prepared office space, hired administrative support, set up the initial infrastructure. We just needed you to say yes. General Okoye stood, extended her hand. Welcome to the team, Miss Jenkins. You're about to make a lot of enemies. Corrupt administrators, incompetent doctors, people who've been getting away with negligence for years. But you'll also save a lot of lives, and that's what matters. Sarah shook her hand. Firm grip. Confident. I'm not afraid of making enemies, General. I've been fired, blacklisted, and nearly destroyed. What else can they do to me? General Webb laughed. That's the spirit. You're going to do just fine. The meeting continued for another hour. Details, logistics, timelines. Sarah would start in 2 weeks. That gave her time to wrap up her commitments, say goodbye to Marcus properly, find her replacement at Happy Paws. As she left the Pentagon, walking out into the bright afternoon sun, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, real hope, not just for herself, but for the system, for the patients, for all the nurses and doctors who wanted to do the right thing but were being crushed by corruption and bureaucracy. She was going to fix this. She was going to make a difference, a real difference, and this time, no one could stop her. 2 months later, Sarah Jenkins sat in her new office, Building E, room 2847, the Pentagon. The office wasn't fancy. It was government issue standard. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a metal desk that had probably been there since the Cold War, a filing cabinet that squeaked when you opened it, 2 chairs that were functional but uncomfortable. But it had what she needed. 3 computers networked together, secure phones, a printer, a whiteboard that covered one entire wall, space for her team to gather, to plan, to strategize. And on her desk, in a simple frame, was a photograph. Private Miller, the 19-year-old kid she'd saved 6 months ago. He was in full dress uniform now, smiling, healthy, alive. He'd sent her the photo with a note. Thank you for my life. I'll never forget what you did, Semper Fi. He'd been deployed, Marines, infantry, somewhere classified, but he was alive, living the life she'd saved. That photo reminded her why she did this, why any of this mattered. Her first hire had been Betty Chen. That was easy. Betty had quit Riverside the day after Pierce was arrested. She'd been waiting, hoping Sarah would call. When the offer came, she'd said yes, before Sarah finished the sentence. Betty was Sarah's second in command, chief of investigations. Her job was to dig into complaints, find patterns, collect evidence. The skills she'd developed exposing Pierce were now being put to official use. Her second hire was Jessica Martinez. That one had surprised some people. The young nurse who'd fumbled the IV line, who'd been more interested in administration than patient care. Why hire her? But Sarah saw something in Jessica. Potential, willingness to learn, and most importantly, humility. Jessica had admitted her mistakes. She'd asked to be taught. She'd proven herself during Holloway's recovery, staying by his bedside, learning the neuro exams, doing them perfectly, every 30 minutes, for 12 hours straight. Jessica was now chief of training. Her job was to develop new protocols, train staff, create educational programs. She was good at it, really good. Turned out her interest in administration wasn't about playing politics. It was about creating systems, building structure, making things work better. Then came the others, 5 nurses who'd been fired or forced out for doing the right thing, for challenging incompetent doctors, for prioritizing patients over protocols, for speaking up when they saw something wrong. Maria Santos, 42 years old, fired from a naval hospital for reporting sexual harassment. The doctor she reported was connected. Her career was destroyed. Now she was chief of ethics and compliance. James Park, 38, forced out of an Army hospital for refusing to falsify records. He documented a botched surgery. The surgeon had wanted him to change the notes, make it look like a complication instead of negligence. James refused. He was blacklisted. Now he was chief of medical records review. Keisha Williams, 50, quit an Air Force hospital after watching experienced staff get pushed out. She'd tried to fight it, filed complaints. Nothing changed, so she left. Took a job at a civilian clinic for half the pay. Now she was chief of staff development. David Chen, 29, no relation to Betty, fresh out of the Navy, forced out for questioning a prescription. A doctor had ordered a medication that would have killed the patient. David caught it. Doctor complained. David was labeled insubordinate. Now he was chief of pharmaceutical safety. And Marcus Thompson, 63, retired Army medic, worked at Walter Reed for 20 years. Forced into early retirement when he reported equipment failures. Equipment that was failing because of kickback schemes, similar to Pierce. Marcus had tried to expose it, got crushed. Now he was chief of equipment and supply chain integrity. Together, they were the Medical Accountability and Training Division, MATD. 8 people, plus administrative support, a small team, but powerful, because they were true believers, people who'd sacrificed everything for their principles, who couldn't be bought, couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be silenced. They trained together. Every morning, 7 a.m., physical training, then 2 hours of case review, learning from past failures, understanding the patterns, how corruption starts, how it spreads, how to stop it. They developed new safety standards, evidence-based protocols, not the bureaucratic nonsense that Pierce had implemented, but real medicine. Protocols that balanced safety with accessibility, that protected patients without killing them. They visited military hospitals, unannounced, surprise inspections. Sarah had full authority. She'd walk into an emergency room at 2 a.m., watch how they operated, talk to the nurses, the residents, the patients, find the problems, the weak points, the corruption, and they fixed things immediately. Found a doctor taking kickbacks? Fired on the spot. Found a nurse falsifying records? Fired. Found an administrator creating bureaucratic barriers that endangered patients? Fired. But they also rewarded. Found a nurse who spoke up? Promoted. Found a doctor who prioritized patients? Recognized. Found staff who were doing it right despite the obstacles? Supported. Funded. Empowered. They weren't just treating patients, they were preventing tragedies. Stopping the next Pierce before he could hurt anyone. Building a culture where integrity was rewarded instead of punished. 3 months into the new role, Sarah was at her desk, reviewing reports. It was late, almost 9 p.m. Everyone else had gone home, but Sarah was still working. There was so much to do, so many hospitals to audit, so many problems to fix. Her phone rang. Marcus. Not Marcus Thompson from her team. Marcus Chen, the old vet from Happy Paws, she answered. Marcus, how are you? I'm drowning, that's how I am, Marcus said, but his voice was warm, teasing. You forgot something, Sarah. What did I forget? You said you'd help me at the clinic on weekends. You promised. I'm holding you to that. Sarah laughed. Actually laughed. A real, genuine laugh. She'd been so focused on the work, on reforming military medicine, on preventing tragedies. She'd forgotten about the simple joy of helping a stray dog, of assisting with a basic surgery, of doing work that had no politics, no corruption, just healing. You're right, I did promise. I'm sorry, Marcus. Don't apologize, just show up. I've got 3 spays scheduled for Saturday, a dental cleaning, and some old retriever with a growth that needs to be removed. I need my best assistant. Sarah smiled, looked at her calendar. Saturday was technically a work day. She'd been planning to review reports, visit another hospital. But Marcus was right. She'd made a promise. And more than that, she needed this. Needed the balance. Needed to remember that medicine wasn't just about big reforms and system changes. It was also about the individual patient. The individual animal. The one life in front of you right now. I'll be there Saturday, Sarah promised. 6 a.m.? 6 a.m. And bring coffee. Good coffee. Not that Pentagon swill. Sarah laughed again. Deal. After she hung up, she sat back in her chair, looked around her office, at the computers, the files, the whiteboard covered in hospital names and investigation timelines. Then she looked at the photo of Private Miller, at his smile, at the life she'd saved. She realized something. She didn't have to choose, didn't have to pick between reforming military medicine and helping rescue animals, between the big work and the small work, between the Pentagon and the veterinary clinic. She could do both. She could help soldiers during the week, reform hospitals, train staff, root out corruption, save lives on a massive scale, and she could help stray dogs on weekends, assist with surgeries, hold frightened cats, save lives on a small scale. Both mattered, both were important, both were medicine, both were healing. She could be both. Pentagon reformer and veterinary assistant, high-level administrator and hands-on helper. Sarah Jenkins, the government official, and Sarah Jenkins, the nurse who just wanted to help. She didn't have to choose. She could be whole, complete. All the parts of herself working together. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt balanced, centered, at peace. She had her work, her purpose, her team, her mission. And she had her grounding, her connection to simple, direct healing. Her reminder of why any of this mattered. She was going to be okay, more than okay. She was going to thrive. 6 months after his arrest, Dr. Gregory Pierce stood in federal court for sentencing. The trial had been quick, surprisingly quick. Pierce's lawyers had advised him to take a plea deal. The evidence was overwhelming. Betty's flash drive, the financial records, the falsified medical records, the testimony from 11 families whose loved ones had died. Fighting it would have meant a longer trial, more publicity, more humiliation, and almost certainly a longer sentence. The prosecution was talking about 30 years, 40. Life if they could prove intentional murder instead of just negligence. So Pierce pleaded guilty to fraud, to medical malpractice, to voluntary manslaughter on 11 counts, to conspiracy, to falsifying federal documents. The list went on. 15 charges total. In exchange for the plea, the prosecution recommended 18 years. With good behavior, he might be out in 12. He'd be 60 when he was released. His medical career would be over. His reputation destroyed, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. But he'd be alive. Free. Eventually. The courtroom was packed. Media in the back rows, cameras outside. This had become a national story. The corrupt doctor, the kickback scheme, the nurse who exposed him. It had everything. Scandal, betrayal, justice. The families of the 11 victims sat in the front rows. Mothers, fathers, children, spouses. The people left behind. The ones living with the holes in their lives. Pierce sat at the defense table. He looked different, smaller somehow. His expensive suit didn't fit quite right anymore. He'd lost weight in jail. The orange jumpsuit and institutional food had stripped away the polished exterior, revealed the small man underneath. His hair was graying, not the distinguished silver of a respected physician, but the dull gray of stress and defeat. His skin was sallow, his eyes were hollow. He looked 10 years older than 6 months ago. Sarah sat in the third row, not front and center, not trying to be seen, but present, a witness, for the victims, for the nurses he'd destroyed, for everyone who'd suffered because of his greed. The judge entered, the Honorable Patricia Morrison, 65 years old, federal judge for 20 years, known for being tough but fair. She'd seen every kind of criminal, every kind of crime. She'd heard every excuse, every justification. She wasn't impressed by doctors or anyone else who thought their status put them above the law. Dr. Gregory Pierce, Judge Morrison began. Her voice was hard, cold. You have pleaded guilty to 15 federal charges. Before I pass sentence, I want to give the victims' families an opportunity to speak, and I want to give you an opportunity to address the court. Does anyone wish to make a statement? 4 family members stood. One by one they spoke, about their losses, about the pain, about the loved ones who died because of Pierce's protocols, his greed, his ego. A woman named Jennifer Blackwell spoke about her husband, 34 years old, father of 3, died because the electronic lock delayed treatment. My children ask me when Daddy's coming home. They don't understand. The oldest is 8. How do I explain that he's never coming home because a doctor cared more about money than people? A man named Robert Chen spoke about his mother, 62 years old, died because an inexperienced nurse misread her vitals. She survived cancer, survived a stroke, survived so much, but she couldn't survive Dr. Pierce's hospital, couldn't survive his incompetence. The stories went on, each one more heartbreaking than the last. Pierce sat there, listening, his head down, his shoulders slumped. Finally, the judge asked if anyone else wanted to speak. Sarah stood. She walked to the front, stood at the podium, looked directly at Judge Morrison, not at Pierce. She wasn't here for him. Your Honor, my name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a registered nurse. I worked at Riverside Military Medical Center under Dr. Pierce. I was fired for saving a patient's life, for breaking his protocol. I lost my career, my reputation, everything. She paused, took a breath. But I'm not here to talk about me. I'm here to talk about Dr. Pierce, and I want to say something that might surprise people. The courtroom went quiet, everyone listening. I don't hate Dr. Pierce. Sarah's voice was calm, clear. I pity him. He had everything. talent, education, opportunity. He was smart, skilled. He could have been a great doctor. He could have saved thousands of lives. He could have built something meaningful, something that mattered. She finally looked at Pierce. He was staring at her now, tears in his eyes. But he wasted it. Wasted it on ego, on greed, on his desperate need to be seen as important. He killed patients, not accidentally, not through simple mistakes, but through systematic negligence, through choosing money over lives, through creating a culture where competent nurses were pushed out and patients were seen as liabilities instead of people. Sarah's voice hardened slightly. He destroyed careers, ruined lives. Not just the 11 patients who died, but the nurses he fired, the staff he forced out, the families left behind. The ripple effects of his corruption will last for years. She looked back at the judge. I hope Dr. Pierce uses his time in prison to think about that, to really think about the choices he made, the lives he destroyed. I hope he finds some measure of redemption, some understanding of the damage he caused, because someone needs to learn from this. Someone needs to change. Sarah stepped back, walked to her seat. The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison looked at Pierce. Dr. Pierce, do you wish to address the court? Pierce stood, slowly, his legs shaking. He gripped the table for support. His lawyer whispered something, probably telling him to keep it short. Don't make it worse. Pierce's voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. He looked at the families. I'm so sorry. There's nothing I can say, nothing that can make this right. I was wrong, about everything. I thought I was building something important, but I was just building my own ego, and people died because of it. Tears were streaming down his face now. Real tears. Not performative, not manipulative, just broken. I don't expect forgiveness, I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I'm sorry, and that if I could go back, if I could change things, I would. I'd do it all differently. He sat down, collapsed, really. His lawyer steadied him. Judge Morrison nodded. Dr. Pierce, I've read the case files, I've reviewed the evidence, I've listened to the testimony, and I've come to a conclusion. You are not a victim here. You are not someone who made a simple mistake. You are a criminal who systematically prioritized profit over patients, who created a culture of fear and incompetence, who allowed people to die to protect your ego and your income. She paused. Let that sink in. The prosecution has recommended 18 years. I'm going to accept that recommendation. Dr. Gregory Pierce, you are sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Your medical license is permanently revoked. Your assets will be seized to compensate the victims' families. You will never practice medicine again. Not in any capacity. Not in any state. Not anywhere. The gavel came down. Final. Absolute. Pierce slumped in his chair. His lawyer patted his shoulder. The marshals moved in, handcuffs. They led him away. As he passed Sarah's row, he looked at her one last time. His eyes were empty, defeated, all the arrogance gone, all the ego crushed. Just a broken man facing the consequences of his choices. I'm sorry, he whispered again. I'm so sorry. Sarah nodded once, acknowledgement, not forgiveness, not absolution, just recognition that he'd spoken, that she'd heard. Then he was gone, led through the side door, back to prison. To 18 years of reflection, regret, hopefully eventually some measure of understanding. Sarah walked out of the courtroom, into the bright afternoon sun. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, just completion. A chapter closed, justice served. Betty was waiting outside. How do you feel? Tired, Sarah said honestly. But it's over, really over. Yes, Betty agreed, it is. They walked away from the courthouse, away from the cameras and the reporters, toward the future. Toward the work that mattered. Toward healing the system that had allowed Pierce to exist in the first place. The past was done. The villain had faced justice. Now came the real work. Building something better, making sure this never happened again. Sarah was ready. She had her team, her mission, her purpose, and finally she had closure. Time to move forward, time to heal, time to save lives. The right way this time. 6 months later, everything had changed. The grand ballroom of the Willard Intercontinental Hotel in Washington, D.C., was filled with light. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, crystal glasses caught the glow and scattered it across white tablecloths. The room buzzed with conversation, with laughter, with the energy of celebration. It was a gala, an official Department of Defense event, celebrating heroes of military medicine, The people who saved lives, who worked in field hospitals and combat zones, who patched up soldiers under fire, who made the impossible possible. The room was packed. Generals in dress uniforms, their chests heavy with ribbons and medals. Senators in expensive suits, their aides hovering nearby. The Surgeon General, the Secretary of Defense, the Joint Chiefs. Power concentrated in one room. The people who ran the military, who advised the president, who shaped national security. But also nurses, doctors, medics, the actual medical professionals who did the work, who saved the lives, who didn't just give orders but actually held the scalpels, actually stopped the bleeding, actually made the difference. At the head table sat Colonel Jack Holloway. He looked completely different from 6 months ago. The gray pallor of near death was gone, erased, replaced by healthy, rugged vitality. His skin had color, his eyes were bright, his movements were strong and confident. He wore his dress blues, the dark navy uniform with the sharp creases. His chest was covered with ribbons, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Silver Star, campaign medals from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, ribbons for valor, for service, for sacrifice, a career's worth of recognition displayed in colored fabric and metal. Next to him sat Sergeant Major Vance, the ranger who'd found Sarah, who'd made the call that saved Holloway's life. His arm was healed now. No more sling. But he still looked intimidating. The kind of man who'd been through things that most people couldn't imagine. The scars on his face told stories he'd never speak aloud. The tables were filled with similar people. Warriors, healers, people who'd seen combat, who'd saved lives under impossible circumstances, who'd earned the right to be here. But the center of attention wasn't the military brass, wasn't the generals or the senators or even Colonel Holloway. The center of attention was the podium, and the man standing behind it, the Secretary of Defense, Harold Chen, 68 years old, former Marine, former senator, now the civilian leader of the entire U.S. military. He stood at the podium in a dark suit, American flag pin on his lapel. His voice carried through the ballroom, strong, clear, authoritative. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather here tonight to honor those who serve in the most difficult circumstances, those who heal when others destroy, those who save lives when death seems certain, those who demonstrate courage not on the battlefield with weapons but in operating rooms with skill and compassion. The room was silent, everyone listening. 6 months ago, something happened at Riverside Military Medical Center that exposed a rot in our system, a corruption that had been growing unchecked. A culture that prioritized profits over patients, protocols over people, ego over ethics. Secretary Chen paused. Let the weight of those words settle. Lives were lost. 11 patients died because of systematic negligence, because experienced medical staff were pushed out and replaced with cheaper, less competent alternatives, because kickbacks and corruption infected what should have been a place of healing. The mood in the room shifted, darker, more somber. People remembered, they'd read about it, seen it on the news, the scandal at Riverside. Gregory Pierce, the corrupt doctor, the falsified records, the deaths. But lives were also saved, many more lives, because of the actions of a single individual, an individual who had been cast aside by the very system she swore to protect, an individual who lost everything for doing the right thing, an individual who refused to give up, even when it cost her career, her reputation, her livelihood. Secretary Chen looked down at the front row. His eyes found her. Sarah Jenkins. Sarah Jenkins, please step forward. Sarah sat at a table near the front, not at the head table. She'd refused that, insisted she wasn't important enough, wasn't high-ranking enough, but they'd given her a prominent position anyway. Recognition. She stood, slowly, every eye in the room turning to her. She wasn't wearing dog-hair-covered scrubs. Not tonight. She was wearing a deep blue evening gown. Simple but elegant. It matched her eyes. Her hair was styled, professional. She wore minimal jewelry, a small necklace, earrings, nothing flashy, but she looked beautiful. Not because of the dress or the makeup, but because of the confidence, the strength, the quiet dignity of someone who'd been through hell and survived, who'd lost everything and rebuilt, who'd faced injustice and fought back. She walked to the stage, her head held high, no trembling, no nervousness, just calm, assured, purpose. The applause started, a few people at first, then more, then the entire room, standing, clapping, the sound building like thunder, filling the ballroom, echoing off the chandeliers. Sarah walked up the steps to the stage, stood next to Secretary Chen, faced the crowd, the cameras, the lights, the attention. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just stood there, present, dignified, real. Secretary Chen waited for the applause to die down. It took a full minute. People didn't want to stop, wanted to show their appreciation, their respect, their recognition of what she'd done. Finally, the room quieted. Secretary Chen continued. Over the past 6 months, Sarah Jenkins has been reinstated with full honors. Her nursing license has been completely cleared, all flags removed, all violations erased. Her record now shows what it always should have shown. 20 years of exemplary service. 20 years of saving lives. 20 years of doing the right thing. More applause. Shorter this time. Respectful. The board of directors at Riverside Military Medical Center has been dissolved. The administrators who enabled the corruption have been removed. The hospital is now under new management. Management personally selected by Colonel Holloway and approved by this office. Management committed to patient safety, to ethical medicine, to the values we claim to uphold. Secretary Chen turned to an aide. The young officer handed him a small wooden box. Navy blue velvet. Official. The kind of box that held important things. Medals, awards, recognition. Secretary Chen opened it. Inside was a medal. Not a military medal. Sarah wasn't military, couldn't receive those. But something else. Something rare. The Citizen Honors Award. The highest civilian honor for valor in the face of danger. Established by Congress, awarded by the Secretary of Defense. Given to civilians who demonstrated extraordinary courage while serving military personnel or the national defense. It was rarely awarded, maybe 5 times a year, to people who risked their lives, who made impossible choices, who embodied the values the military claimed to represent. Secretary Chen lifted the medal, held it up for the room to see. Gold, heavy, a ribbon in red, white, and blue, an eagle in the center, wings spread, proud. He stepped toward Sarah. She stood still, waiting. Sarah Jenkins. Secretary Chen's voice was formal now. Official. For courage above and beyond the call of duty. For refusing to let patients die regardless of the cost to yourself. For exposing corruption at great personal sacrifice. For demonstrating integrity when it would have been easier to stay silent. For saving the life of Colonel Jack Holloway and countless others through your actions and your example. He pinned the medal to her gown, just above her heart. The weight of it pulled slightly on the fabric, a physical reminder, a symbol. I present you with the Citizen Honors Award. May your example inspire others to do what's right, even when it's hard, even when it costs everything, even when no one is watching. The applause erupted again. Louder this time, the entire room on its feet. Generals, senators, nurses, doctors, everyone, clapping, cheering. Some people were crying, moved by the moment, by the recognition, by the justice of it all. Sarah stood there, the medal on her chest, the crowd applauding, the cameras flashing. This was her moment, her vindication. Everything she'd lost was being given back, and more. Secretary Chen stepped aside, gestured to the microphone, giving her the floor, her chance to speak. Sarah stepped forward, looked out at the crowd, at the hundreds of faces, at the power and prestige gathered in one room. She should have been nervous, intimidated, overwhelmed. But her hands didn't shake, her voice didn't waver. Because she wasn't speaking to impress anyone, wasn't trying to sound important. She was just speaking the truth, the same truth she'd always spoken. I didn't do it for a medal, Sarah said, her voice clear, cutting through the silence. I didn't do it for recognition or awards or moments like this. I did it because every life matters. Whether it's a private fresh out of basic training, whether it's a colonel with 30 years of service, whether it's a stray dog hit by a car and brought to a clinic by a kind stranger. She paused. Let that sink in. When you're a nurse, when you're a healer, you don't clock out when things get hard. You don't walk away when the protocols are stupid or the administrators are corrupt or the consequences are severe. You fight. You do what's right. Because that's the job. That's the calling. Her eyes scanned the room, found Colonel Holloway, found Betty, found Jessica, found the members of her team scattered throughout the crowd. I'm not special. I'm not unique. There are thousands of nurses and doctors and medics who do this every day, who make the hard choices, who prioritize patients over politics, who sacrifice their own comfort and safety to help others. They're the real heroes, not me. I just happened to get caught, and I was lucky enough to have people who fought for me, who exposed the truth, who demanded justice. She held up the medal. This doesn't belong to just me. It belongs to Betty Chen, who risked everything to collect evidence. It belongs to all the nurses who quit in protest. It belongs to Sergeant Major Vance, who found me when I was needed. It belongs to Colonel Holloway, who demanded accountability. It belongs to everyone who refused to accept corruption as normal, who demanded better, who fought for change. Sarah put the medal back against her chest. So I accept this award, not for me, but for all of us. For everyone who believes that medicine should be about healing, that hospitals should be about patients, that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs everything. The room erupted. Not just applause this time. Cheers, shouts, people on their feet. Some were crying openly now, moved, inspired, reminded of why they'd chosen this profession, why they'd taken an oath, why any of it mattered. Sarah stepped back from the microphone. The secretary shook her hand, formally, then pulled her into a brief hug. Unexpected, but genuine. "Thank you," he whispered, "for reminding us what we're supposed to be." Sarah nodded, walked off the stage, back to her seat. The applause followed her, didn't stop until she sat down. The gala continued. Other awards, other speeches, other recognition. But everyone knew what the highlight had been, who the real hero was, what the real message had been. Integrity matters, truth matters. Fighting for what's right matters, even when the cost is everything. Later that night, the gala was winding down. The formal program was over, the speeches done, the awards given. Now it was just socializing, networking. People drinking champagne and talking about budgets and policy and all the mundane things that came after the inspiration. Sarah had escaped, quietly, slipped out through a side door. Made her way to the hotel balcony, a large terrace overlooking the National Mall. From here, you could see the Washington Monument lit up against the night sky, the Lincoln Memorial in the distance, the dome of the Capitol building, the symbols of American power and history. The air was cool, a gentle breeze. Sarah stood at the railing, still in her evening gown, the medal still pinned to her chest, but alone now, quiet, away from the crowds and the attention. She heard footsteps behind her, turned. Colonel Holloway walked out onto the balcony. He'd loosened his collar slightly, held 2 glasses of champagne, handed one to her. "You gave a hell of a speech," Holloway said. He leaned against the railing next to her, both of them looking out at the monuments. "I learned from the best," Sarah smiled. A real smile, warm, genuine. "How are the lungs, the heart, everything working?" "Running at 100%, thanks to you." Holloway turned to face her, his expression serious now. "Sarah, I have a question. Well, more of a situation I need to make you aware of." "Okay." "Riverside, they want you back. As chief of emergency medicine, not just head nurse, the whole department, Pierce's old position. Double the salary you were making before, full benefits, complete autonomy, your choice of staff, your choice of protocols, everything." Sarah looked out at the monument lights, the Washington Monument piercing the sky, a symbol of permanence, of dedication, of things that lasted. "I know," Sarah said quietly. "They sent the offer letter yesterday. Called 3 times today, they're very eager. Are you going to take it?" Sarah swirled her champagne, watched the bubbles rise. "I don't know. The money is incredible. The position is everything I could want professionally. The chance to rebuild the department the right way, to train nurses, to implement real protocols, to make sure what happened never happens again." She paused. "But the memories there aren't all good. Actually, most of them are terrible. That's where I was humiliated, fired, escorted out by security. That's where Pierce destroyed my career. Can I really go back there? Can I walk those halls every day and not remember?" Holloway nodded. "Understanding. That's a fair concern. Trauma doesn't just disappear because the villain gets punished." "Exactly." Holloway reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, official looking. He handed it to Sarah. "Then don't go back there," Holloway said simply. Sarah unfolded the paper. Her eyes widened as she read. It was official Department of Defense stationery, letterhead, seals, signatures. To Sarah Jenkins, RN. From Office of Special Operations Command. Subject, employment offer. Role Chief Medical Officer, Forward Operating Bases and Special Medical Consultant to General Holloway. Sarah looked up, stunned. "Chief Medical Officer? Jack, I'm a civilian nurse. I'm not even military anymore. I never was, technically. How can I be? We made an exception, Holloway interrupted. That dangerous, charming, wolfish grin spreading across his face, the smile that had probably charmed 1,000 people and intimidated 1,000 more. Turns out, when you save a senior special operations commander's life and expose systematic corruption, you get some leverage. I used mine. He stepped closer, his voice becoming more serious, more intense. I realized something in that trauma room, Sarah. When I was dying, when Pierce and his team were failing, when you walked in and took control, I realized I can't afford to have you cleaning dog kennels at a veterinary clinic. No offense to Marcus, but your skills are wasted there. Marcus might disagree, Sarah said with a slight smile. Maybe, but I need you where the fight is, where lives are actually on the line every day, where the medicine is hard and the decisions are impossible and the stakes are life and death. Holloway's eyes were intense now, focused. I need the person who has the guts to tell me no when I'm being an idiot, the person who will break the rules if it means saving a life. The person who cares more about doing what's right than following orders. He stepped even closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Intimate, personal. I prefer not to be saved by anyone else. Sarah looked at the contract again. Read the details. The salary was good. Not quite what Riverside was offering, but substantial. The benefits were comprehensive. Government pension, full medical, travel expenses, housing allowances if needed. But more than the money, it was the mission. Working directly with special operations. The most elite units in the military. The teams that operated in the most dangerous places, that faced the most complex medical challenges, that needed the absolute best medical support. And she'd report directly to Holloway. No bureaucracy, no administrative interference, no protocols designed by people who'd never saved a life. Just direct access, real authority, the ability to actually make a difference. She looked at Holloway, really looked at him. This man who had come back from the dead, who'd remembered her name when he was dying, who demanded she be found, who'd launched an investigation that brought down Pierce, who destroyed a corrupt system just to clear her name and get justice. This man who was offering her not just a job, but a purpose, a mission, a place where she belonged. Sarah reached into her small clutch purse, pulled out a pen. Holloway chuckled and pulled one from his pocket, offering it to her. She took it. She placed the contract on the balcony railing, used it as a desk, and she signed. Her name, Sarah Marie Jenkins, official, binding, real. She handed the contract back to Holloway. You know I'm going to be a nightmare to work for, right? I don't follow protocols if they're stupid. I don't respect rank if the person is incompetent. I don't stay quiet when I see something wrong. I'm everything that made Pierce fire me, everything that makes me a problem. Holloway folded the paper carefully, precisely. Then he placed it in his breast pocket, right over his heart, where it would stay, safe, protected, important. I'm counting on it, Nurse Jenkins, he said. That grin again. I'm counting on it. They stood there for a moment, two people who'd been through hell, who'd survived, who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances, who'd built something from the ashes. Not romance. This wasn't a love story, but partnership, respect, trust, the kind of bond forged in life or death situations, the kind that lasted. Sarah looked out at the monuments, at the symbols of American ideals, justice, liberty, service. They were just symbols, just stone and light. The real meaning came from people who fought for those ideals, who sacrificed for them, who refused to let them become empty words. People like her, like Holloway, like Betty and Jessica and all the others. The ones who did the right thing, even when it cost everything. When do I start? Sarah asked. 2 weeks, Holloway said. That gives you time to wrap up at the Medical Accountability Division, transition your role, find your replacement, and say goodbye to Marcus properly. I'm not leaving Marcus completely, Sarah said firmly. I'll still help on weekends when I can, when I'm stateside, when there's not a crisis. He gave me a job when no one else would. I don't abandon people like that. Holloway nodded. I wouldn't expect anything else. That's why I picked you. They clinked glasses, a toast, to new beginnings, to justice, to the future, to doing what's right. Sarah Jenkins had lost everything. Been destroyed, humiliated, thrown away like garbage. But she'd survived, fought back, rebuilt, and now Now she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, with people who valued her, who respected her, who needed her. She was home. Finally, after 6 months of hell, after a lifetime of fighting, she was home. Sarah Jenkins lost everything because she did the right thing. She was humiliated, publicly fired in front of colleagues and administrators. Her reputation was dragged through the mud by a powerful doctor who cared more about his ego than his patients. She was forced to clean dog kennels for $15 an hour, to scrub floors and empty litter boxes, to watch her savings dwindle to nothing, to wonder if doing the right thing had been worth it. While Dr. Gregory Pierce took the credit, while he was promoted to chief medical officer, while his face appeared on magazine covers and morning news shows, while he gave TED Talks and wrote best-selling books, while he was nominated for Surgeon General of the United States, it seemed like injustice had won. Like corruption triumphed. Like the bad guy got everything while the hero lost it all. But karma has a way of finding everyone. Dr. Gregory Pierce thought he was untouchable, thought his connections and his money and his prestige made him immune to consequences. He thought he could destroy nurses who challenged him, could kill patients through negligence, could take kickbacks and falsify records, could do whatever he wanted. But he forgot the most important rule of medicine. You can't cheat death. And you certainly can't cheat the truth. The truth always comes out, eventually. Maybe not immediately, maybe not when you want it to, but it comes out. And when it does, the people who built themselves on lies find themselves with nothing to stand on. Pierce ended up in federal prison, 18 years, his medical license permanently revoked, his reputation destroyed, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about greed and corruption and the dangers of ego. Everything he'd built, everything he'd stolen, everything he'd lied for, gone, erased, reduced to nothing. In the end, it wasn't the powerful hospital administrator who saved the day. It wasn't the arrogant surgeon with the impressive credentials. It wasn't the people with money and connections and prestige. It was the fired nurse who refused to give up, the woman who'd been told she was nothing, who'd been thrown away, who'd been reduced to cleaning kennels. Sarah Jenkins proved that true heroism isn't about a title or a badge. It's not about the letters after your name or the position on your business card. It's not about how much money you make or how many awards you've won. True heroism is about what you do when the lights go out and no one is watching. When doing the right thing costs you everything. When the easy path is to stay silent and the hard path is to speak up. When you could save yourself by sacrificing someone else, but you choose to sacrifice yourself instead. True heroism is about integrity, about character, about being the same person in private that you claim to be in public, about actually living the values you say you believe. Sarah Jenkins lost her career for saving Private Miller's life, but in doing so, she set in motion events that saved Colonel Holloway, that exposed Dr. Pierce, that reformed an entire system, that prevented countless future deaths. One choice, one moment, one decision to break the lock and save a life. That's all it took. She didn't know it would lead here. Didn't know that 6 months later she'd be standing on a Pentagon balcony with a medal on her chest and a new mission ahead of her. Didn't know that doing the right thing would eventually be rewarded. She just knew a kid was dying, and she could save him. So she did. Consequences be damned. That's heroism. That's integrity. That's what matters. If you enjoyed this story of justice, karma, and bravery, please hit the like button to support the channel. Your support helps us bring more real-life inspired drama stories every week. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who need to hear this message. The message that doing the right thing matters, that integrity matters, that standing up to corruption and incompetence and ego matters, even when it costs everything. Subscribe for more stories like this. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories of heroes without capes. Stories of justice prevailing. Stories that remind us what we're capable of when we choose courage over comfort. And here's a question for you. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? If you were the nurse, if you saw the dying patient, if you knew the protocol was going to kill him, if you knew breaking the rule would cost you your career, would you have broken the lock? Would you have saved the life? Would you have sacrificed everything for a stranger? For a 19-year-old kid you'd never met before? Let us know in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your experiences, your own stories of times you had to choose between doing what's right and doing what's safe. Because these stories matter. These choices matter. Every day, people face decisions like Sarah's. Maybe not as dramatic, maybe not with someone literally dying, but moments where integrity costs something, where doing the right thing isn't easy. What do you choose? Who do you want to be? What kind of person do you become when no one's watching? Sarah Jenkins chose courage, chose integrity, chose to save a life even when it cost everything. What will you choose?